So, the topic of today's video is something that I haven't covered in a very long time. And last time I did this, I only covered my 50 greatest players of all time, and now I've taken that up all the way to 100. And just remember, as we get into this list, I'm just a guy who hangs out in my bedroom making videos. I don't have any proofreaders, I don't have any editors, I do all of this stuff myself. And so just keep in mind, I'm just a guy who's trying to honestly make decisions about who are the 100 greatest players of all time. And although I do know the game's history pretty well, I might have even forgot someone who should have been in this top 100. So if you think that's the case, please let me know in the comment section below who you think should be on this list or who you think should be in a much different spot. But this is something I'm looking forward to doing, and if you've ever seen one of my lists before, you are going to notice that there is a lot of changes on this list, because as you learn more about the game and as you grow up as a person, you kind of just tend to change your mind on some things, and that's okay. I personally think that's okay, and having the humility to be like, you know what, I think once upon a time, I was very wrong on this, and now I'm kind of shifting my position a little bit. So that's what I'm doing today. So strap in, I hope you guys are ready for a long video, and I'm ready to tackle this. And again, no list is perfect. Everybody's list looks different. So let me know what yours is in the comment section. But again, remember, I have respect for all of these guys, and I'm excited to talk about these players and rank them based on my own opinions. But ultimately, everybody's got to have their own list. So I'm ready to trigger some people. So let's get into it. Number 100 is one guy that I never get much appreciation, and that is Walt Bellamy. This guy was an all-time great center, 6'11" tall. He had one of the greatest rookie seasons in NBA history for the Chicago Packers in 1962, where he was the Rookie of the Year winner. He averaged roughly 32 points per game, 19 rebounds, and 3 assists. When people are always talking about the 1960s and the competition for Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain being weak, one of the guys that you are definitely disrespecting is this guy, Walt Bellamy. One of the greatest players of all time. He's an NBA Hall of Famer, 4-time All-Star. And this guy was just a fantastic bucket getter, rebounder, and shot blocker as well. Interestingly enough, he's one of those players almost like a Blake Griffin and like Tyreke Evans, who really had the prime of their career right in the beginning of their career as a rookie or as a sophomore player. And after that point, by his 5th or 6th year in the league, he was a 22 points per game scorer instead of a 30 points per game scorer. So maybe some issues with just conditioning or work ethic. But ultimately, this guy is a legend who unfortunately is not often recognized as such by modern NBA fans. So let's get into the next one. I have got a guy who has been in the news quite a bit lately, Mr. Big Shot, Chauncey Billups. Unfortunately, he's been in the news for all the wrong reasons, but this 6'3" point guard / shooting guard was so clutch. I absolutely hated him for what he did to my Los Angeles Lakers in the 2004 NBA Finals, where he was the Finals MVP. What a lot of people tend to forget about Chauncey is not only was he a great perimeter shooter and a great offensive weapon, but he was a good defensive player as well, and even made 2 all-defense teams in his career. And so Chauncey was very solid, got as high as about 19 points per game in 2006 with the Pistons, and he was also got as high that year as 5th in the MVP voting. So for me, this was a guy I coveted as a Lakers fan. I thought he would have been perfect for our team, but instead we were often competing against him. But he was a great player and certainly worthy of the top 100 of all time. Number 98, one of the more overlooked Laker legends in NBA history would be Gail Goodrich. This guy was the starting shooting guard for the historic 1972 Lakers championship team that went on to win 33 straight regular season games. He ended up making the NBA All-Star game 5 separate times. Gail Goodrich, this 6'1" guard, was an absolute bucket getter. He actually led the team in scoring that year, averaging 25.9 points per game. But again, he played for the Lakers, didn't play for New Orleans until much later in his career, and because of that, he's quite overlooked. Decent facilitator, but not like one of the all-time great passers by any means. And didn't really do too much on the stat sheet outside of scoring the basketball. But he is worthy of being on the list. If he had brought more things to the table, maybe you could argue him being higher. But as of now, he'll have to settle for the 98th spot. Number 97 is not only one of the greatest guards of all time, one of the greatest facilitators of all time, but he was an all-time great coach as well. And I'm talking about the great Lenny Wilkens. He was one of the best Hawks players of all time. He made 9 All-Star teams. He actually led the league in assists per game in 1970. And the NBA thought he was good enough to be on the 75 greatest players of all time. So I guess in a certain sense, the NBA voters consider him much better than even I do. But he got as high as second for the MVP voting in 1968, where he averaged about 20 points, 8 rebounds, and 5 assists. And so this guy was an incredible floor general, did it for a while, and had many good teams that he was a part of. Never broke through and won the championship, though, but Lenny Wilkens certainly deserves his due respect. Now, at number 96, we're looking at another guy who gets a lot of love in the modern NBA, and that's Mark Price. The reason why Mark Price gets so much love is because he's a guy who could really play in this modern league if given the opportunity. He was a 6-foot point guard. He made 4 All-Star teams, and the crazy thing is, over the course of his career, he nearly had 50, 40, 90 percentages. I mean, he was about 3% short from the field goal percentage, but 40% from three-point range and over 90% from the free throw line. Mark was a part of some very competitive and dark horse candidate Cleveland Cavaliers teams. I think outside of LeBron James and Kyrie Irving, you're probably looking at Mark Price as the greatest Cleveland Cavalier in NBA history. And got as high as 7th overall on the MVP standings. And so yeah, this guy was a wonderful player and would absolutely kill it if he played in this modern NBA. Number 95, Chris Webber. Unfortunately, C-Web didn't have the longevity to be much higher on this list. During his prime in the early 2000s, he was in the conversations with Tim Duncan, Kevin Garnett, and Dirk Nowitzki for the title of the best power forward in the entire league. For goodness sake, in 2001, at the age of 27, he was averaging 27 points per game, 11 rebounds, 4 assists, 1.3 steals, and nearly 2 blocks. And then, of course, you guys remember the famous 2002 season where they went all the way to the Western Conference Finals, where they lost to Shaq and Kobe's Los Angeles Lakers in 7 games. And some people would argue that if he hadn't been screwed by the referees, they would be deservedly so the champions that year. He was also a Rookie of the Year winner, made 5 All-Star teams, and also led the league in rebounding in 1999. Probably the most underrated aspect of this 6'10 power forward was not just his ball handling, but man, was he a terrific passer. And in that sense, he made the perfect leader for the 2002 Kings, which really just emphasized team play and ball movement. Unfortunately, by the time Webber got to his early 30s, he had a meniscus tear. He had just some general health problems. So his prime was definitely before the age of 30. And basically the instant, he got to that age, he was just never the same ever again. But for his amazing all-time great prime, he's certainly worthy of being in the top 95 players in NBA history. Number 94, just one spot ahead of C-Web, is another all-time great power forward / center, and I'm talking about the 7-foot Pau Gasol. As you guys all know, he was a 2-time NBA champion alongside of Kobe Bryant, and as Kobe said, after the first full game of him playing alongside of Pau Gasol, he proclaimed there was a God because he was so happy to have Pau on his team. Gasol is a Hall of Famer. He made 6 All-Star teams. He was also the Rookie of the Year for the Grizzlies in 2002. And Gasol got as high as 21 points per game with the Grizzlies in 2007. He was also massive for their championship run in 2010, where he really stepped it up in the finals and matched the Boston Celtics' physicality. He was much more ready for that series than he was in 2008. And so Pau, especially coming from a longtime Lakers fan, he deserves to be on this list for sure. And his game was just so pretty, so polished. Sometimes he was a little bit too finesse, but man, was he ever good at it. And so, yeah, Pau, I like him in the 94th spot. Next, at number 93, we have a guy who's very rarely talked about, and that's Dave DeBusschere. He is a New York Knicks legend. He made 8 All-Star teams. He won 2 championships with the Knicks. And the most underrated aspect, or underappreciated aspect of his game, I should say, for this, power forward / small forward, was his defensive end of the court. 6 all-defense teams, and he was on the NBA's 75th anniversary team. So again, another case of the NBA thinking he's even better than I did. But he spent a lot of time with Detroit. He's most famous for his time with the Knicks, but he was a lockdown defensive player and a double-double machine during that time. The Knicks of the early to mid 1970s would not be the same without this guy. They would have done a whole lot less contending. And so, yeah, he's certainly worthy of a solid spot on this list. Number 92, we're looking at another New York Knick. This guy was a much better bucket getter, though. This is the 6', 7" small forward Bernard King. And Bernard would have been much, much higher on this list if he hadn't had some serious knee problems that unfortunately very much shortened his career. He was the NBA scoring champion in 1985. He made 4 All-Star teams and 4 All-NBA teams, and of course is a Basketball Hall of Famer. King in 1985 actually led the league in scoring at 32.9 points per game and finished 7th that year in the MVP voting. Just 1 year prior, in 1984, he was actually 2nd overall in the MVP rankings. Also, kind of a fun fact about Bernard is he's actually the Christmas Day record holder for the most points ever scored in a Christmas game with 60. And so, yeah, this guy was awesome. People have compared him to LeBron James in the open court just because he was fast, he was strong, he was explosive, and he just knew how to finish with power. So kind of like a LeBron James in his first stint with Cleveland. And then his game was just so polished in the mid-range. Like I said, tremendous score. But unfortunately, his career should have been much longer, but his health didn't permit that. Number 91. Personally, I think a guy who's very, very difficult to rank, but I have got arguably the greatest 6th man in NBA history, Manu Ginobili. He's a Basketball Hall of Famer, obviously, a 4-time NBA champion with the San Antonio Spurs, and even as a 6th man, managed to make 2 All-Star teams. The thing about Manu is, although he was a 6th man of the year, he really accepted that role because he was such a team player and he wanted his San Antonio Spurs to succeed, and they had a lot of championship success. But in reality, this guy could have been playing 36 to 40 minutes per game and could have been one of the best players in the league. His game was kind of similar to James Harden with his handle, with his change of direction, with his footwork, with his Euro step, with his ability to facilitate and score. And beyond that, Manu was also ridiculously clutch. And so a guy I really despised during their battles, with the Lakers for all those years. But Manu certainly deserves his respect, and is probably the guy I would choose as the greatest 6th man in NBA history. Number 90, Joe Dumars. One of the greatest backcourts of all time, never gets talked about much, and that's Isaiah Thomas and Joe Dumars. Michael Jordan is always singing the praises of Joe. Broadway Joe was fantastic. He had an amazing pull-up jumper. He was a 6-time All-Star. And he was there is no Jordan stopper, but he was leaned upon by the Pistons to be the Jordan stopper. Made 5 all-defense teams, and this guy was just so classy. If the bad boy Pistons, if you would describe them as bad boys, this was the good boy on that team, because this guy was just a class act. He actually won the Sportsmanship of the Year award. And beyond that, he was also huge in the 1989 NBA Finals, where they swept the Los Angeles Lakers. He was the Finals MVP of that series. And so Joe does not get enough credit. Mean crossover dribble, terrific handle of the basketball, but he was such a quiet, calm and reserved personality on a very loud and obnoxious villain type team. So it's no wonder that he's kind of, overlooked and forgotten in NBA history. And I wouldn't be surprised if there's a lot of other YouTubers who have made their own top 100 lists and Joe Dumars is nowhere to be seen on it. But personally, I think this 6'3" combo guard definitely should be. And so, yeah, that's why I've got him at number 90. Number 89 is one guy that you would never, ever want to refer to as a plumber, and that is the ripped, monstrous 6'11" Nate Thurmond. It's a little bit of an ongoing joke on our Johnny Talks podcast that this guy just looked like the Incredible Hulk. One of the greatest defensive players in NBA history. He made 5 all-defense teams over the course of his career, but keep in mind, all-defense teams did not always exist throughout his NBA career, so he should, in reality, have a lot more than that. 7-time All-Star, he was also honored by the NBA as one of the 75 greatest players of all time. And you could certainly make the argument that this guy was the best Wilt Chamberlain stopper in NBA history. Now, Bill Russell, of course, has an argument for that as well, but a very strong case can be made for Nate Thurmond, who usually held Wilt well below his scoring and efficiency standards. One of the only 4 players in NBA history to get a quadruple-double. That was the day he made his debut with the Chicago Bulls, and so a legendary night for Thurmond. I wish they had always tracked his steals and blocks throughout his career, because the truth is he might have had several of those if that had always been eligible for him. We've got number 88, Dolph Schayes. This guy is from way back in the day, so he usually doesn't get much credit. Started his NBA career in the 1940s and ended up finishing it in 1964. But Dolph made 12 All-Star teams. He led the NBA in rebounding in 1951, and he was the NBA champion in 1955. He's a Hall of Famer. He's a 6'8" power forward / center. So not the biggest center, but back then, if you go that far back to the 1940s, they definitely had some smaller ones. But if you look at what he was for his time, this guy was dominant. He was usually among the league leaders in efficiency, both from the field and from the free throw line. Like I said, led the league in rebounding in 1951, averaging 16.4 per game. And so, yeah, this guy is a legend. Unfortunately, there just isn't a bunch of film available of him. And obviously, anytime you go back into the 40s, you're going to have a lot of critics who don't respect what you accomplished, but I do. And because of that, I have him on 88 on my list. Now, down to 87. We've got Damian Lillard, one of the all-time great perimeter scorers, one of the greatest three-point shooters that we've ever seen. And this 6'2" point guard made 9 All-Star teams, 7 All-NBA teams. He was also recognized as one of the 75 greatest players of all time. I was very critical of that decision because I do think there was a lot of players who were much more deserving. But Dame time is something that always entertains, and for a while he was one of my favorite players in NBA history. He got as high as 32.2 points per game in the 2022 to 2023 season. He has multiple seasons in his career where he averaged at least 30. And so, but was kind of a cone as a defensive player. Doesn't have a ton of accolades. In a sense, he kind of reminds me of Reggie Miller in many ways, where he's a very clutch player, solid scorer, fantastic three-point shooter, but doesn't have the most stats or accolades to his name. Number 86. One of the greatest defensive players of all time, at least since the turn of the millennium. You can argue that he's the greatest defensive player, and I'm talking about Big Ben Wallace. This guy led the league in rebounding twice in his career. He led the league in blocks in 2002. And of course, he was a part of what is arguably the greatest defensive team in NBA history, the 2004 Detroit Pistons, which went on to win the championship and stunned the super team Los Angeles Lakers, defeating them in 5 games. He is tied for the most Defensive Player of the Year awards in NBA history with a total of 4. And in reality, he probably should have won 5 straight based on just how dominant he was. They gave it to Ron Artest one year, but you could definitely argue that he should have won 5 straight. Unfortunately, he is not a great offensive player, which keeps him from being further up this list. He's also the worst free throw shooter ever. So bad that he makes Shaquille O'Neal look like a good free throw shooter. That's how bad he was, shooting a career 41.4% from the field. And so definitely deserves his flowers for what he did as a rebounder, for what he did as a defensive player, and for his contributions to one of the all-time great teams. But there are certain ways where he was a liability, and it keeps him from being further up this list. Number 85, another bucket getter and one of the greatest Olympian athletes of all time, Carmelo Anthony. This 6'7" small forward / power forward made 10 All-Star teams. And man, I've talked about it many times before, but Melo in Denver, he was just a different kind of beast. If it wasn't for Kobe being on a mission in the 2009 season, we might be looking at Carmelo as an NBA champion to this day, because that Nuggets team was very, very scary. He did lead the league in scoring in 2013 when he was a member of the New York Knicks, and he did finish third in the MVP voting that year. So one of the all-time great scorers, sound footwork, great post-up game, and Melo was also ridiculously clutch. If you needed a basket and there was less than 5 seconds left, there was very, very few players who were a better option than Carmelo Anthony. Even during Kobe's prime, that was always the argument. Would you rather have Carmelo or Kobe taking the last shot, because he was that good? Number 84, another player that gets a ton of respect from the NBA, because he's one of the 75 greatest players of all time according to the NBA. And I'm talking about the 6'3" point guard / shooting guard, Dave Bing. He's an NBA Hall of Famer. He was the NBA scoring champion in 1968, and he was also the Rookie of the Year in 1967. Bing was awesome. Awesome dual threat as both a facilitator and as a scorer. He spent most of his career playing with Detroit, but eventually spent a couple years in Washington and Boston as well. And so this guy definitely isn't appreciated enough, but that tends to be how it goes for guys who played in the 60s and 70s. But Dave was fantastic. And again, like I said, the NBA thinks he's even better than I do, having him in the top 75. Number 83, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, Dikembe Mutombo. I like Mutombo on the list a little bit higher than Ben Wallace, just because Mutombo is more efficient and definitely offers more things as a scorer. It's not like Dikembe had the most polished game as an offensive player, but he was a solid lob threat. You could run the pick and roll with him for sure. He did lead the NBA in blocks per game 3 times in his career. He also led the NBA in rebounds per game twice. He made 8 All-Star teams, 6 All-Defense teams, and was the NBA's Defensive Player of the Year 4 times, so tied for the most in NBA history. This guy's an absolute legend, rest in peace legend. Got as high as 4.5 blocks per game in the 95-96 season. And so yeah, Mutombo was fantastic. Obviously, he was a part of that legendary playoff series where his 8-seeded Denver Nuggets upset the 1st-seeded Seattle Supersonics. And I know you guys all know the image of him just like corralling the basketball when they defeated them in the 5th game. And so yeah, very, very legendary player, and he will be greatly missed. Number 82, Jerry Lucas. This 6'8" power forward was a 7-time All-Star. He won the NBA championship in 1973 with the New York Knicks. He was also the Rookie of the Year in 1964, and he's been honored as one of the 75 greatest players of all time. I think part of the reason there's a lot of players in the top 75 that are not personally in my 75 is also because I think I have more modern players in my top 75, which makes sense that I'm just doing like my overall ranking. But I think in order to get younger guys in that, in that very select group, the NBA is going to be a little bit more strict. But he got as high as 21 points per game and 20 rebounds per game in 1965. This guy's usually not appreciated enough for just being one of the all-time great rebounders. Obviously, you have to take that with a grain of salt, considering, the era and how there was lower field goal percentages. But for him specifically, he spent his entire career shooting 50% from the field, which back then in the 60s and 70s was insanely efficient. Number 81. Wes Unseld. Yeah, this guy was a legend. Definitely an undersized player by modern standards. He was a 6'7" center, but he is a Hall of Famer. He's on the 75 greatest team, 5 All-Star teams, was the NBA's rebounding champion in 1975, and was an NBA champion in 1978. Famously, Wes Unseld did win the NBA's Rookie of the Year and the League MVP in 1969. And as some of you longtime viewers of the channel might know, I have been harsh on this guy, maybe more so than most people in recent years. And it's only because he's often called the greatest player in Washington history, or even just, Baltimore history, playing for the Baltimore Bullets and, of course, the Washington Bullets, which are now the Washington Wizards. But personally, I would have given that honor to Elvin Hayes, which is another great player he's played with and who will be higher up on my list. But with that being said, Wes is a legend, solid defensive player, but his bread and butter was not just his fantastic rebounding and outlet passes, but the way he was just a team-first guy and helped his team win. Next on the list, we're looking at number 80, DJ Dennis Johnson. Probably the most underappreciated player of the 1980s Celtics teams. This guy was in many ways their floor general as a 6'4" guard. He made 5 All-Star teams as a Hall of Famer and was a 3-time NBA champion with them. And what's funny is, although, he's most famous for his time with the Boston Celtics, man, he was a superstar before then, because he was actually the 1979 Finals MVP when he played for the Seattle Supersonics. And so that was his real stardom as far as like an individual scorer. He had some solid years in Phoenix as well, but now he's most famously revered and remembered for his time in Boston. Also, one of the greatest perimeter defenders of all time. He was usually the guy who had the assignment of guarding guys like Michael Jordan, for example. 9 all-defense teams in his career. That's among the most in NBA history, especially for a guard. So yeah, DJ definitely deserves your respect, and you shouldn't be talking about all-time great teams like the 1986 Boston Celtics without talking about this legend, and certainly don't forget his time in Seattle as well. Number 79, another player from the 75 greatest players of all time, according to the NBA. We're talking about the 6'6" small forward / power forward, Billy Cunningham. 5-time All-Star, 4-time All-NBA player. And this guy was awesome, not just as a scorer, but as a rebounder as well. For example, in 1970 with Philadelphia, he finished 5th overall in the MVP voting while averaging 26 points per game and getting 14 rebounds a game. And based on that era, Billy was also very, very efficient. He also went on to be a fantastic head coach as well. And so, yeah, definitely an overlooked great from generations past. Number 78. Bob Lanier, another fantastic, underrated player. Bob doesn't get celebrated enough. I've got one faithful viewer in my comments who's always talking about how Bob Lanier is the most underrated player in NBA history, and he certainly got a good case. 6'11" center, he made 8 All-Star teams. He was part of the All-Rookie team in 1971, and he was the All-Star Game MVP in 1974. When you look at Bob, he was just the model of consistency. He played most of his career with the Detroit Pistons, and over that time, he was usually getting between 12 to 14 rebounds a game, averaging between 23 to 25 points per game. And so, unfortunately, Detroit was not very competitive at that time, and he didn't have the most, a tremendous amount of talent to play alongside of. And because of that, he wasn't able to win as much as many of his peers. And so that is definitely something that you have to remember about him. But yeah, Bob Lanier is one of the most underrated players of all time, with beyond a shadow of a doubt. Next up, we're looking at number 77. He's an active player, and I think the first active player on this list, which makes him really, really difficult to rank. But a former MVP winner, we got the 7-foot center, Joel Embiid. Now, Embiid is a very difficult one to rank, not just because his career isn't over, but because, for all the moments he's had where he's looked great, he's had injuries concerns, and he's had a lot of failures in the NBA playoffs. But at his best, he's really, really good. In 2023, where he won the MVP over Nikola Jokic, which some people think he didn't deserve, he still had very, very ridiculous numbers. 33 points per game, 10 rebounds a game, 4 assists, and 2 blocks. Like, Say what you want, it was definitely an MVP caliber year. And, so it's debatable whether or not he deserved it with that specific competition, but he was definitely worthy of it just about most years. At number 76 is one of the pillars of the San Antonio Spurs dynasty, and I'm talking about their point guard, the 6'2" Tony Parker. He was a Hall of Famer, and he was a 6-time All-Star and a 4-time NBA champion. Although he was not normally known to be in the conversation of the best point guard in the entire league, he was just barely on the outside looking in, generally speaking. And then beyond that, he was also a big game performer in the NBA playoffs. This guy was absolutely consistent. He made it as high as 5th in the MVP voting in 2012 with the Spurs. You can't talk about Tony without talking about his amazing finishing ability around the rim. Just had an absolutely beautiful teardrop that he could get just about over any center, probably even Wilt Chamberlain if he wanted. And so, yeah, Tony was fantastic. Also, he was the Finals MVP in 2007, so he will always be appreciated by San Antonio Spurs fans for the contributions he had. Now we're into the top 75, which is a big deal because the 75th anniversary team is honored by the NBA. So this is my official list of the players that I believe should be in the 75 greatest of all time. The first one that we're starting off with is the amazing two-way defensive player, Sidney Moncrief. This guy was the back-to-back DPOY winner and the first ever DPOY winner in NBA history, and he might have even won it the year prior, but unfortunately the award did not yet exist at that point. He made 5 all-defense teams. At times, he gave Michael Jordan fits in the NBA playoffs, just made it much more difficult for him to score. Moncrief, as much as we love to talk about his defense, he was a great offensive player as well, like in 1983 where he got as high as 22.5 points per game, shooting about 52% from the field. And so if you're really looking at the greatest perimeter defenders of all time, usually guys like Michael Jordan and Gary Payton get a ton of love for that title. But this guy certainly has a case for being the best of the very best. And so Sidney Moncrief, fantastic player, just barely good enough to be in my top 75. 74 is a player who I don't think gets enough respect for his contributions. And I'm talking about the all-time great three-point shooter, the 6'5" Klay Thompson. He was ranked 98th overall on Bleacher Report's 100 greatest players of all time, and he also didn't make the list for the 75 greatest players of all time according to the NBA. And to me, that's a travesty. There's no way I'd have a guy like Damian Lillard, who's never played a possession of defense in his life, over a guy like Klay Thompson. Klay Thompson is one of the ultimate 3-and-D role players, but production-wise, he's basically good enough to be considered a star. He was a 4-time champion, so was always a part of the Warriors dynasty. And then you just look at all the records he had. I mean, obviously, Game 6 Klay was famous for all the threes he was making in the playoffs. He holds the NBA record for the most three-pointers made in a single game. He holds the NBA record for the most points scored in a single quarter with 37, where he, oh, by the way, went 13 of 13 from the field. And then, of course, he had that game where he famously scored 60 points in just 3 quarters on very, very few dribbles. And so Klay is incredible, and Steph Curry is certainly not as high up on the list as he is if he didn't have this guy as his partner in crime helping him get it done. Number 73, we've got Reggie Miller. Miller time was awesome. He just helped define the 1990s, with obviously his trash talking, with his big game performances. New York Knicks fans especially remember this guy for just being an absolute assassin. This 6'7" shooting guard for a long time was the NBA's all-time leader in three-pointers made, and I can only imagine how many threes he'd be making if he played in this modern game. From an accolade standpoint, not the most accomplished player. He did have 5 All-Star team selections, 3 All-NBA teams, was not an elite defensive player by any means, but in 1990, he got as high as 25 points per game while hitting a ridiculous 41.4% of his three-point shots. How that would translate to the modern NBA, I could only imagine. But Reggie Miller, definitely worthy of being in the top 75 to me, and the NBA agreed. Next on the list, we've got number 72, Kyrie Irving. I would probably take him as the greatest ball handler in NBA history. There's some other great ones like Jamal Crawford, Isaiah Thomas. You could go on and on. Allen Iverson certainly deserves a mention. He was fantastic for the Cleveland Cavaliers even before LeBron James showed up. And then obviously the biggest made shot in Cavaliers history came from Kyrie in the 2016 NBA Finals, where he helped them defeat the 73-9 Golden State Warriors. 9-time All-Star, 3-time All-NBA. He was the Rookie of the Year in 2012, and he was the All-Star Game MVP in 2014. And so, yeah, this guy was a certified bucket getter, just absolutely stupid good at finishing around the rim. Not only is he in the argument for the greatest ball handler of all time, but he's also in the argument for the greatest layup package of all time. And so, yeah, Kyrie was just amazing. Got as high as 27 points per game several times in his career. So for me, easy choice for a guy in the top 75. I got him at 72. Number 71, Ray Allen. This guy is such a fantastic sniper. This 6'5" shooting guard had so many different phases to his NBA career. Now, obviously, people remember him in his time with Boston, where he was kind of their big shot maker down the stretch, had plenty of game winners. Obviously, people remember what was possibly the most clutch shot in NBA Finals history when he made this game winner for the Miami Heat. But he was a legitimate superstar early on in his career for both Milwaukee and for the Seattle Supersonics. He was a 10-time All-Star, and obviously he won 2 NBA championships between his time with Boston and Miami. He's one of the 75 greatest players of all time, according to the NBA. And man, this guy could also get above the rim. He was a fantastic athlete, not just a great shooter. People nowadays think he was just a shooter. No, he was a slasher and he was a finisher, man. Now we're up to number 70, and I gotta be honest, guys, I was genuinely irritated when I saw that this legend wasn't in the NBA 75 greatest players of all time. And I'm talking about Alonzo Mourning. This 6'10" center/power forward was not only a legitimate superstar during his early years of his career with Charlotte and then eventually Miami, but for the Miami Heat as the backup to Shaquille O'Neal, he was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate and helped them win the NBA championship in 2006. And he won the Defensive Player of the Year award twice as well. He got up to about 23 points per game with Miami in 1996. He got as high as 3.9 blocks per game with Miami in 1999, and that year he was actually the runner-up to Karl Malone for the MVP award. And so this guy, for his contributions to both the offensive end and the defensive end, and in the playoffs and in the NBA Finals, he's certainly worthy of being one of the top 75 greatest players of all time. Unfortunately, Alonzo is remembered for being on the receiving end of some of the most iconic dunks in NBA history. Guys like Michael Jordan, guys like Vince Carter have postered this guy a few times before, but I almost kind of see that as a compliment to Alonzo as well, because the reason he's on the receiving end of those plays is because this guy was an absolute dog when it came to contesting everything. He tried to block every shot, and nowadays we see so many cowards just duck and cover or try to get out of the way because they don't want to be on a poster. And Alonzo Mourning was on the complete opposite end of that. This guy went for everything, and for that reason, I respect him even more. So for me, he's a top 70 player of all time. Number 69 is a guy who definitely didn't have much longevity to his game, but his offensive game was beautiful, extremely polished, and he was a freakish athlete. And I'm talking about the 6'4" shooting guard / small forward, David Thompson. Famously, Michael Jordan has said that he modeled much of his footwork and offensive game after David's game. Thompson was a 5-time All-Star. He won 2 All-Star Game MVPs and was the NBA Rookie of the Year in 1976. Famously, he once had a 73-point game where he scored over 50 of those points in the first half alone, and that was when he was in the competition with George Gervin in 1979 for the NBA scoring title. In only his rookie year in 1976 in the ABA, he was the runner-up for the league MVP award. Unfortunately, there was health issues, there was substance abuse, there was all kinds of reasons why he was basically done in the NBA before he had even reached the age of 30. So if he had the longevity, he probably could have been much higher on this list, but he's definitely a Denver legend and worthy of being here. Next up, we got number 68, another guy who did not have much longevity, mostly due to his back problems, and that's the great Tracy McGrady. This 6'8 shooting guard slash small forward is famously revered for his incredible leaping ability, for his incredible finishing ability. Obviously, there was the time where he scored 13 points in only 35 seconds. And Kobe Bryant described him as a player just like himself, but who was even taller. He had all the skills, all the abilities. Unfortunately, for one reason or another, whenever it came to the postseason, it always seemed like he was coming up short as he was getting eliminated in the first round year after year after year. I don't know if you replace, him with Kobe Bryant. Do him and Shaq go on to win 3 championships? Well, he certainly believes that. But T-Mac was awesome. He led the NBA in scoring in 2003 and 2004, getting as high as 32 points per game. And that Orlando Magic team that he was legitimately carrying was definitely not a very talented team at that point of his career. So, although he did want to be the man, I can only imagine if him and Vince Carter had stayed together in Toronto, how much success they would have had, especially in a weaker Eastern Conference. But with all that being said, with his incredible scoring ability, even his ability to block shots early in his career, Tracy McGrady is worthy of the 68th spot on my list. Number 67 is one of the greatest scorers of the 1980s decade, and I'm talking about the 6'5 small forward Adrian Dantley. He averaged at least 30 points per game over a 4-season stretch. So amazing scorer. Won 2 scoring titles. He was also so efficient that it's hard to believe. Over the course of his career, he shot 54% from the field. And again, that's as a 6'5 small forward. This guy was polished. He was patient. He was a mid-range artist. And so from an efficiency standpoint, plenty of people love him. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1977, 6-time All-Star as well. The only major criticism about him is that he wasn't necessarily the best guy for the locker room. He didn't get along with a lot of his teammates, and he had some issues with the Detroit Pistons before they traded him for Mark Aguirre. And he was kind of unlucky in that sense, where he was a really talented player, but in the case of the Lakers, in the case of the Pistons, he kept on leaving his teams right before they went on to go and win the championship. I still think he was good enough where they could have maybe won the championship with him, but in that sense, he was just unlucky. At number 66, we've got half man, half amazing Vince Carter. Now, obviously, he's remembered by, as most people consider him, being the greatest dunker in NBA history, both in actual games and in the dunk contest as well. He was a 6'6 shooting guard slash small forward, and he was the Rookie of the Year in 1999, and around that time when he began his career, many people saw him as a guy who had a Michael Jordan type trajectory. He was constantly being referred to as the next Michael Jordan, because he was similar to MJ in the sense that he was incredible. He lit basketball stadiums on fire. He was just so freakishly athletic, but he also had a very smooth jumper and a very polished game. So again, the same way they called him Air Jordan, they called this guy Air Canada. And so Vince was amazing. He was one of the best players in the NBA up until probably the mid-2000s, I would say. In 2001 specifically, he challenged Allen Iverson and tried to make his own trip to the NBA Finals, but came up just short in Game 7 versus the Philadelphia 76ers. But that year, he averaged about 28 points per game, 5.5 rebounds, 4 assists. And the one part of his game that is never, ever appreciated enough is Vince Carter was legitimately one of the greatest three-point shooters in NBA history. It helped give him a tremendous amount of longevity. And he even had that playoff game against the 76ers where he made 9 3-point shots while scoring 50 points. And so Vince was awesome. There has since been questions about his work ethic and his mentality and approach. he potentially had the talent to be one of the select few greatest players of all time, but just could never pull it off. I also think his conditioning became an issue at a certain point. Like, yeah, he had the athleticism to really last for a long time. Honestly, I think even his conditioning was a concern at a certain point. He obviously had the athleticism to play and make windmill dunks into his 40s, and so there was that. But he started to get a little bit bigger, put on a few more pounds, and didn't quite stay at an elite level like a guy like Kobe Bryant did. And maybe if he had a little bit more of that mentality, he could have done that. And so, yeah, naturally, one of the most gifted wing players that we've ever seen in the history of the league, but some would argue that he left a lot to be desired. Number 65, the player who scored more points in the 1980s decade than any other player. I'm not talking about Dominique Wilkins. I'm not talking about Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, Michael Jordan. I'm talking about Alex English. This 6'8" small forward was kind of similar to the previously mentioned Adrian Dantley, where he just had a very polished and smooth mid-range game. Alex English also had a release point that was way above his head, and standing at 6'8", that made him very, very difficult to defend. He was a part of the Nuggets teams in the 1980s that believed that the best defense was double the offense. And so they were a very, very prolific offense, and they made a couple deep playoff runs, but usually fell short at the hands of the Los Angeles Lakers. He's a Hall of Famer. He was the league scoring champion in 1983, and he made 8 NBA All-Star teams. But like his Nuggets teams in the 1980s, he was not a great defensive player, which certainly kept him from being higher up on this list. But with that being said, he is, without question, one of the greatest scorers of all time, and was very efficient while doing it. And for that reason, I have him in the 65th spot. Now, another modern player who's very, very difficult to rank in the number 64th spot is SGA, Shai Gilgeous-Alexander. And Shai is awesome. Based on his trajectory, he should be much, much higher on this. This guy is at a very hyped time in the NBA because we're coming off of a season where he basically did something that only guys like Michael Jordan and Shaquille O'Neal have done, which is win the MVP, win the Finals MVP, and be the league scoring champion. And so, yeah, this guy has already made 3 All-Star teams, but he's still very, very young. He's only 27 years old, so he's still got some of his prime years ahead of him. And he certainly got this season off to a very, very strong start. I expect his OKC Thunder to win a lot of games. His game is so polished. And again, a lot of people do think he's a foul merchant, which, you're free to share your opinions on that in the comment section below. But he is ridiculously skilled, and the rate he's going to be much, much higher on the list. And so we'll see how it all turns out. But SGA, right now, based on the fact that he's still so young and not really very high on any of the all-time lists and still very few accolades, I think I just got to put him in the low 60s, but it's hard to rank him much higher than that. A guy who's been in the NBA a little bit longer and had a little bit more time to accomplish things is Jayson Tatum. This guy obviously won the NBA championship with the Boston Celtics in 2024. Obviously, a solid three-point shooter, incredible scorer. In 2023, he finished as high as 4th in the MVP voting while averaging 30 points per game. Obviously, he's still recovering from the Achilles tear, but there is a lot of quality basketball ahead of this 27-year-old, soon-to-be 28-year-old player. Number 62 is Anthony Davis. And guys, I gotta be honest, I'm really, really curious as to where you rank this guy, because I feel like he's one of the more difficult players to rank in all of NBA history. I mean, there's no questioning his talent. He's a power forward / center, 6'10" tall, 10-time All-Star, 3-time leader in blocks, was always in the conversation for Defensive Player of the Year, although he never actually won that award. And then he won an NBA championship with the Los Angeles Lakers in 2020. And although LeBron James was the Finals MVP, Anthony Davis put on a really, really great performance as well. The problem with AD is a very well-known one, and I know you guys all know this, but the guy's just always injured. He doesn't play a tremendous amount, of games. I mean, you can count, on just a couple of fingers how many times he's actually played more than 76 games. Only one time in his career has he played more than 76 games in a season. And so, yeah, 80's fantastic, but just because the best ability is availability, you know, he really should be a top 50 talent all time, maybe even higher than that. But because of that, I only have him at the 62nd spot. Number 61 is the truth, Paul Pierce. Now, the thing about Pierce is, yes, he does think he's one of the select few greatest players of all time, the way he's always talking himself up and comparing himself to other greats from NBA history. But with that being said, I do think people are beginning to lose track of just how special this guy really was. This guy was called the truth for a reason. He was one of the best scorers from the 2000s to, I would say, the mid to late 2000s. And he was also one of the most clutch shot makers in the entire league. He was a 10-time All-Star. He absolutely killed my Lakers in the 2008 NBA Finals and was the Finals MVP that season. As you all know, he's a Hall of Famer. He was an elite three-point shooter. And ultimately, I think he's a guy who time has not been very kind to. And I do think, although he overrates himself, I do think most NBA fans today tend to underrate this guy. Number 60, Dwight Howard. Dwight Howard should have been on the NBA's 75 greatest players of all time. I thought it was an absolute travesty, and there's an argument that he was really the most disrespected player for not making the top 75. I mean, just think about this guy. He won a championship with the Los Angeles Lakers in 2020, and I know he wasn't a superstar player anymore at that point in his career, but coming from a Lakers fan, I can tell you he was a massive part of our success that season. This 6'10 center was dominant in many aspects. For one, when he was with the Orlando Magic in, the mid to late 2000s and the early 2010s, he was one of the best rebounders in the entire league. He actually led the league in rebounding 5 times in total. He also led the league in block shots 2 times, and he won the Defensive Player of the Year award for 3 straight seasons. Again, this was all while consistently putting up about 20 points per game. Dwight Howard was very frequently putting up 20-20 nights in his prime as one of the most athletic players in the league. And for that guy to not be honored among the 75 greatest players of all time is just insanity to me. Number 59, Dennis Rodman. Now, Dennis Rodman, you wouldn't describe him as a superstar player. In a sense, he's kind of like the ultimate role player, and in a way, he's kind of a specialist. He specializes in his defense, and he specializes in his rebounding. But among specialists, you could argue that he's the greatest of all time in that aspect. He's a power forward / small forward who's 6 foot 7 inches tall. He won a total of 5 NBA championships between his time with the Pistons and the Bulls. He was a 2-time Defensive Player of the Year winner, made a total of 8 All-Defense teams, and he even led the NBA in rebounding 7 separate seasons. One thing that I truly appreciate about Rodman is he's probably the most versatile defender in NBA history. I mean, just think about it. Throughout his career, he's played many different positions on the basketball court, especially defensively. When he was lean and when he was quicker with the Detroit Pistons, he would often guard point guards like Magic Johnson, or shooting guards like Michael Jordan, or small forwards like Larry Bird and Dominique Wilkins. But then, when he was with the Bulls and he put on lots of muscle, then he would defend a power forward like Karl Malone or Charles Barkley, and he would even occasionally guard a center like Shaquille O'Neal. Like I said, this guy is one of the most versatile and best of the best defenders that you will ever see. Number 58 is Big Game James Worthy, and I gotta say, this guy was my favorite player growing up as a kid. I remember wearing my pool goggles all around the house just because I wanted to look like Big Game James. With that being said, I don't feel like this 6'9 small forward / power forward of Lakers lore really gets enough credit. I feel like he should be the next Laker up to get a statue outside of Crypto Arena. There's a reason they called him Big Game James, and that was because he stepped up every time the Lakers needed it. He was the Finals MVP in 1988, was huge for that team, and he was absolutely perfect for Magic Johnson and for the fast-paced Showtime Lakers offense. So many times he was on the receiving end of Magic's dishes and was finishing with a Statue of Liberty dunk. He was a 7-time All-Star for the Lakers, a 3-time NBA champion, and rightly so. He's one of the NBA's 75 greatest players of all time. Big Game James was awesome, was huge in the playoffs. I could go on and on about this guy, and I already have a couple videos on the channel dedicated to him. So if this sounds too high to you, I imagine you're probably young and don't know a ton about his game, but Big Game James was just incredible. Number 57, we've got Willis Reed. Now, Willis Reed is a New York Knicks legend. He was a 6'10 power forward / center. He's a Hall of Famer and obviously is on the NBA 75 greatest team. He was also a 2-time Finals MVP and even made an all-defense team as well. Most famously was when he returned to the NBA Finals after an injury. It's one of the most iconic moments in Knicks history. A career average of about 19 points and 13 rebounds. He came into the league and was immediately impactful with numbers like that, as he was the Rookie of the Year in 1965. And so, yeah, there could even be an argument that Willis should be higher. But as for myself personally, I've got him at number 57. Number 56, we have got Jason Kidd. Honestly, maybe I don't have him ranked high enough, but this guy was a triple-double machine. He was also an elite defensive player. I think a good argument is whether or not you have Steve Nash or Jason Kidd higher, but the one area where Jason Kidd really has the advantage is, man, what a great defensive player he was. 9-time All-Defender, and even though he played point guard for the majority of his career, there were times where he was given the assignment of guarding guys like Kobe Bryant and Dwayne Wade and did a pretty damn good job of doing that. He led the NBA in assists per game 5 times in his career. He was such a fantastic passer, one of the all-time great lob passers more specifically. That's what I really remember about him is, man, was he exciting when he was alongside of Kenyon Martin, Vince Carter, guys like that. J. Kidd also led his New Jersey Nets to the NBA Finals in back-to-back seasons in 2002 and in 2003. Unfortunately for him, he ran into, the Los Angeles Lakers with Shaq and Kobe, and then Tim Duncan, who was on a mission in 2003. He did help the Mavericks, though. You can't forget that. He helped them win the NBA championship in 2011. So yeah, Jason Kidd's awesome. Honestly, if anybody's critical towards me that I don't have him higher, I don't blame you. I genuinely thought about ranking him higher, but on this list, I've got him at number 56. Now, number 55, I've got Sam Jones. This is one of the NBA legends of the 60s who unfortunately is really overshadowed by the legacy of Bill Russell. Was Bill Russell fantastic? Yes. Does he get all of the credit he deserves? Absolutely. Bill Russell was awesome. With that being said, Sam Jones was a 10-time NBA champion, and Bill Russell wasn't usually leading the Boston Celtics in scoring. He had other guys to lean upon to carry them offensively. One of those guys was Sam Jones. He had a beautiful mid-range jumper, just a great pull-up jumper, was really ahead of his time in that way. He got as high as 25.9 points per game in 1965. He even had a couple times where he dropped like 50 points in the playoffs, and so this guy was huge for Boston, a huge legend for them. And honestly, just doesn't get enough credit, but that tends to be how it goes when you play for a franchise as successful and prestigious as the Boston Celtics. At number 54, I've got another New York Knicks legend, and he's one of the all-time great point guards of NBA history, Walt Frazier. This 6'4" point was so great as a defensive player, 7-time All-Defender, but also a great floor general, terrific passer, was absolutely huge for the Knicks, and in 1972 specifically, he was averaging 23 points per game for that team as well. There is a legitimate conversation on who you should rank higher, Willis Reed or Walt Frazier, and I'd be willing to have that debate, but for myself personally, I do have Walt a little bit ahead of Willis Reed. He's on the NBA 75 greatest team, made 6 All-NBA teams, 7 All-Star teams, and so yeah, an absolute legend. Knicks fans definitely appreciate him, and you could even make an argument that he should be higher based on how great he is as a two-way player. Number 53. Should be much higher on the list, but I'm going with Bill Walton. The reason why I say he should be much higher on the list is because this guy had an injury history that was so long and vast that it would make Anthony Davis blush. Let's be honest. One of the most injury-prone players in the history of the league, but Bill Walton, he was kind of like the predecessor, or let's say the prototype to Nikola Jokic in a way. 6'11 center, was a pretty good scorer, not elite, but pretty good scorer, getting as high as 19 points per game in 1978, was absolutely a solid shot blocker, led the NBA in blocked shots with 3.2 in 1977, and really his claim to fame is the fact that he's one of the greatest passing big men in the history of the league. It was very normal in his time in Portland for him to get the ball in the post and kind of facilitate from there in a way that's similar to other NBA legends like Nikola Jokic, like Arvydas Sabonis, and even like Wilt Chamberlain at points. He was also a monstrous rebounder. In 1977, he led the NBA in rebounding, getting as high as 14.4 per game. He was a two-time NBA champion. He won the championship with the Blazers in the late 1970s. But an aspect that people forget of his legacy is that he was the Sixth Man of the Year winner with the Boston Celtics in 1986, a team that has an argument for being the greatest team in NBA history. Unfortunately for Walton, the injuries were really picking up by the time he finished, say, his third season in the NBA. And so even when he won his MVP in 1978, it was kind of a controversial selection because he only played 58 games that season. And I do believe that's the fewest games played of any MVP season in NBA history. Which kind of tells you how good he must have been in order to win that despite playing so few games. And so, yeah, Walton was fantastic. Unfortunately, a lot of people think that he had a GOAT big man potential, but he'll have to settle for just 53rd on the list because of how injury prone he was. Number 52 is another guy who's difficult to rank on this list, and it's Luka Doncic. Luka is only 26 years old, but he's already accomplished so much. Statistically, he is an absolute monster. Famously, in 2024, he had just a ridiculous season where he averaged about 34 points, 9 assists, and 9 rebounds. And so Luka's crazy, already had some massive moments in the playoffs, took his Dallas Mavericks to the NBA Finals once, and now he's just been killing it with the Los Angeles Lakers so far. At the point I'm recording this audio, he's averaging over 40 points a game right now for the Lakers, and so Luka has been absolutely incredible. Just fantastic passer, fantastic rebounder, floor general, and is seemingly just getting better and better. And so by the end of Luka's career, I imagine he's going to be top 20, maybe even top 15 on this all-time list. But given the fact that he's so low on the all-time rankings and has such a long way to go, he'll have to settle for 52nd. Number 51, Russell Westbrook. This is another guy who's difficult to rank, so for me, he's just outside of the top 50. A lot of people have had conversations about whether or not he helps a team be successful. Is it even possible for Russell Westbrook to be on a championship team? Those have been a lot of narratives going around, but again, they had their opportunities. They became very, very close when they got to the Western Conference Finals in 2016, and then even in the NBA Finals in 2012 when they lost to the Miami Heat. But Westbrook, he has one of the most legendary MVP seasons in NBA history when he averaged a triple-double, a 32-point triple-double in 2017. He carried that team. He was absolutely needed. But in a way that's similar to a guy like, say, Allen Iverson, he's not going to blend in perfectly with a lot of different players. You know, it's going to be hard to find a team and find other superstars that work alongside of this guy. So for that reason, as monstrous statistically as he is, I'm leaving him just outside my top 50 because I do think there's an argument to be had that he's not necessarily an S-tier superstar when it comes to helping your team win basketball games and even championships. Now, we're getting to the top 50. Starting off the list at number 50 is Pistol Pete Maravich. One of the legends of the NBA, this guy was so ahead of his time for multiple reasons. One, he absolutely loved transition basketball. He was so good as a passer, so good as a transition passer, and just a fantastic perimeter shooter. He had games where he scored a ridiculous amount of points, like for example, 1977, he was averaging 31.1 points per game. And let's be honest, if the three-point line had always existed during his era, I can only imagine how many points he could have scored in several different games. And actually, he didn't have the three-point line for the vast majority of his career, but in the 1980 season, when they first introduced the three-point line to the NBA, he shot 67% from the three-point line. Now, given he was 10 of 15 from three-point range, so it's not like it was a huge sample size. It's not like there was a lot of volume there, but that is a testament to how lethal he was as a three-point shooter. He wasn't a great defensive player. Some of his teammates early on in his career actually were critical of him, that he was a little bit too showboaty, because again, a lot of the things he was doing, like no-look passes and behind-the-back dribbles and that sort of thing, wasn't really that common in that era. So it's hard to know for sure if those were valid criticisms or if it was jealousy or what that was specifically. But Pistol Pete was one of the all-time greats, and I do think he's a guy who would absolutely love to play basketball in this modern era. At number 49 is one of the most athletically gifted players that I have ever seen in my life, and I'm talking about Clyde the Glide Drexler. This 6'7" shooting guard was incredible, and in a way, from a skill set standpoint, he was kind of similar to a more recent legend, like I would say Clyde Drexler, in the sense that he was an elite perimeter shooter, but man, as an above-the-rim athlete, he was absolutely incredible. He could dunk from the free throw line just like Michael Jordan could. Some of his finishes above the rim were just absolutely insane. But he was a great scorer. As you guys all know, he did win the NBA championship in 1995 with the Houston Rockets as a co-star to Hakeem Olajuwon. But with that being said, he did make it to the NBA Finals 3 times in total, because he made it with the Blazers when he was the best player on that team in 1992 and in 1990. He got as high as 27.2 points per game in 1989. This guy was absolutely awesome. He was a 10-time NBA All-Star. And so, yeah, as a defensive player, he was decent. Would never made any all-defense teams, so that's probably the one thing that really holds him back from being higher up on my list. But with that being said, Clyde the Glide was pretty incredible. Number 48, James Harden. James Harden is another player who's really difficult to rank on this list for several reasons. Of course, he is an active player, but he is in the twilight of his career, so, not the most difficult active player to rank. He was a fantastic six-man for the OKC Thunder for 3 years before he eventually went to Houston, where he was really allowed to shine and became one of the greatest scorers in the history of the league. He got as high as 36 points per game in the 2018 to 2019 season. He was also the league MVP in 2018, and he was either first or second in MVP for 3 straight seasons between 2017 and 2019. And so, yeah, James Harden was awesome. 3 scoring titles, also 2 assist titles, and an 11-time All-Star. With that being said, the one thing that really holds him back from being further up this list is the fact that he had so much disappointment in the NBA playoffs. Year after year, it's crazy. I made a whole video talking about it, breaking it down year by year, and it's honestly jarring how much he let his team down in the NBA playoffs. I think that has a lot to do with the way he plays the game. I think because his game relies so much on layups and perimeter shooting, and he's kind of a little bit predictable, it's easy to make adjustments on him in the NBA playoffs. Also, for the vast majority of his career, he was not just a subpar defensive player, but really a poor one, if we're being honest. Later on in his career, he did improve greatly as a post defensive player. But with that being said, there's a lot of holes in his game, and for that reason, as talented as he is, given that he's one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, it's still not enough for me to have him higher than the 48th spot on this list. Similarly, I have Steve Nash at number 47. Now, Nash is quite simply one of the most efficient players in NBA history. Obviously, you guys know he was a fantastic passer. He was the leader of the Phoenix Suns' 7-second offense. And so, that was so transcendent. At that time, it was way ahead of its time. He led the NBA in assists per game 5 times in his career. He was a 2-time MVP winner in 2005 and 2006. And, obviously one of the greatest passers, but again, about that efficiency, Steve Nash had like a 10-year stretch where if you average it out over 10 years, he was putting up 50, 40, 90 percentages over that stretch. And you guys know I love those kind of statistics. And so Nash was incredible, but legitimately, he was one of the worst defensive point guards of his era. He could have had a little bit more longevity, but unfortunately his back problems really started to hamper the tail end of his career. And so although he's fantastic, although he's a great player, although he was really ahead of his time as far as an offensive, fast break weapon, unfortunately there was a lot left to be desired between his health and especially because of his defense. Number 46 is a guy who typically doesn't get enough credit, and that is Artis Gilmore. Now, Artis Gilmore was a massive 7'2" center. Honestly, he's probably known by most people today by being the center of the Bulls' all-time team in NBA 2K. But man, he was so much more than just that. He spent probably the first 5 or 6 seasons of his career in the ABA, so that affects some of his all-time numbers when you're looking at rebounds, points, blocks, all that sort of thing. But in total, between the two leagues, he was a 5-time All-Defender. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1972. He was also the MVP in 1972, and he won the ABA championship in 1975. He was also an 11-time All-Star. And so, yeah, this guy also jumped around quite a bit in his career, starting his career in Kentucky, then Chicago, then eventually San Antonio. Eventually, he wrapped it up in Boston. And when you have guys like that, even guys as good as, say, Moses Malone, who really are journeymen throughout their career, that tends to hamper their legacy a little bit to where they're not really appreciated as much as they should be, because now they don't have one organization specifically that really claims them because they spent so much of their career in many different places. With that being said, this guy was an absolute monster. Got as high as 23.7 points per game, actually as high as 24.6 points per game with Kentucky in 1976. And then as a rebounder, he's got as high as 18 rebounds per game in 1974. And so, yeah, the instant he came into the league, he was an MVP threat, and he maintained that level of play for quite a while. So Artis Gilmore is not a guy I typically see ranked very high on these lists, but I think that's just because people tend to rank, more recent players much higher than I do. And so Artis definitely deserves to be in the top 50 if you ask me. Number 45, one of the most overshadowed big men in the history of the league, and I'm talking about Dave Cowens. And the reason why Dave is so overshadowed is because he was a 6'9" center who won NBA championships with the Celtics, but he did it somewhat recently after Bill Russell had just won 11 for the Celtics. And so, obviously he's not going to be able to fill those shoes. But with that being said, he was still one of the all-time greats. A 3-time All-Defender, won the championship with the Celtics in 1974 and in 1976. Consistently for 4 years straight, he was in the MVP conversation, usually between the 1 or the 4 spot. Actually did win the league MVP in 1973 and was the Rookie of the Year in 1971. And so Dave was fantastic, but unfortunately, because he played for the Celtics, he's extremely overlooked. If he was with a small market franchise who didn't win nearly as much as the Celtics did, I think this guy would get a lot more attention than he typically gets. Number 44, another old school legend, and if you ask me, the greatest player in Washington Wizards / Washington Bullets history, and I'm talking about the Big E, Elvin Hayes. This 6'9" power forward always came up big when it mattered the most in the NBA playoffs. He was the 1969 scoring champion, had 2 rebounding titles, and won the championship with the team in 1978. 2-time All-Defender and made 6 All-NBA teams as well. He was also a 12-time All-Star. And was the Rookie of the Year runner-up, and the year he led the league in scoring was his rookie year. And so it's crazy how many of these guys from the 60s and 70s just came into the league NBA ready. I think it's because a lot of them spent, their full tenure in college. So by the time they got to the NBA, they were really ready to storm the league. And so Elvin Hayes was fantastic. I do think he was robbed of the finals MVP when they won the championship in 78. And so to me, his legacy should be even greater than it is. But for myself personally, I have him at number 44. Now, number 43 is a guy who I typically praise a lot more than other people, and I'm talking about Bob McAdoo. Bob McAdoo was just absolutely incredible. For a short period of time in the 1970s, he was actually rivaling Kareem Abdul-Jabbar for the title of the best player in the NBA. Between 1974 and 1976, he was either first or second in the MVP race for 3 straight years, and he actually won the MVP in 1975 over Kareem Abdul-Jabbar while averaging 34.5 points per game and 14 rebounds per game. This guy wasn't a big bruising center by any means. He was actually only 6'9", but his game was all about mid-range artistry and great footwork. He was extremely polished. He was also the Rookie of the Year in 1973 and a 3-time scoring champion. Personally, I think he should have 2 MVPs rather than 1, because I do think it was ridiculous that he lost the MVP to Kareem Abdul-Jabbar in 1976 when Kareem's Lakers didn't even make the playoffs that year. In my opinion, if you don't make the playoffs, you shouldn't be an MVP, and for that reason, I would actually have Bob McAdoo as a 2-time MVP winner. So he's 43rd on my list, a lot higher than a lot of other players, but you could argue that he should even be higher than that, because he did actually win 2 NBA championships with the Lakers, and although that was the twilight of his career, he was a pretty good contributor coming off the bench, averaging as high as 15 points per game in 1983. And so, yeah, lots of different phases and chapters to his career, and he was always very, very impactful. So I have him at 43rd, but you could even argue higher than that. Number 42 is one guy that I believe is one of the most difficult players to rank in the history of the league, and I'm talking about the NBA legend Kawhi Leonard. The reason why this guy is so difficult for me to rank is because, yes, he's so proven from an accolade standpoint, but my goodness, if the best ability is availability, then that has been his kryptonite throughout the vast majority of his career. This guy is one of the faces of load management. He's got injured quite a bit throughout his career. Very rarely did he play at least 70 games in a season, and so that is definitely something that holds him back on this list. With that being said, at his best, the guy was absolutely ridiculous. During his run with the Toronto Raptors, where they won the championship in 2019, which again is their only championship in franchise history, he was often getting comparisons to Michael Jordan because he was playing that well in the playoffs. Obviously, you guys know about him as a defensive player. He was a 7-time All-Defender and won 2 Defensive Player of the Year awards. And a lot of people refer to this guy as the LeBron James stopper due to the job he did on LeBron when he was on the Miami Heat. Led the league in steals in 2015, and again, a 2-time NBA champion between his time with the Spurs and between his time with the Raptors. His time with the Clippers, there was a lot of expectations heading into that when he joined with Paul George, but unfortunately, he's just been labored by injuries, and it's kind of been underwhelming since then. So yeah, let me know in the comment sections where you actually rank this guy, because I think his potential was much, much higher than this. And if I was ranking this list based on their peaks, I would also have him top 25, to be honest. But because we're looking at the totality of his career and how many games he missed does factor into this, personally, I only have him in my 42nd spot. Number 41 is arguably the greatest center in NBA history to never win a championship, and I'm talking about Patrick Ewing. Patrick was incredible, but he is overshadowed by the fact that he played in an era with the greatest center rotation in NBA history. I mean, just look at the guys who were available in the 90s. You had Hakeem Olajuwon, who was obviously the best from that era, and then there was Patrick Ewing, there was David Robinson, you even had a young Shaquille O'Neal on the Orlando Magic, and then even some of the more underrated ones like Alonzo Mourning and Dikembe Mutombo. It was just really, really hard to stand out in that era. With that being said, he is a New York Knicks legend. This 7-foot center was a monster as a shot blocker, pretty damn good scorer as well, as he got as high as 28.6 points per game in 1990. Did challenge the Chicago Bulls and actually went to 7 games with them at one point. But unfortunately, for like a 5-year stretch, he was eliminated in the NBA playoffs by a team that went on to go win the NBA championship. And so, yeah, there was so much left to be desired with this guy. You could argue that he just played in the wrong era when it comes to the fact that his prime overlapped Michael Jordan's prime, and then along with the fact that there were so many other great centers at that point. Like if Patrick Ewing played in the early 2010s where his greatest competitor was Dwight Howard, he would have completely dominated that era. He was the Rookie of the Year winner in 1986, 7 All-NBA teams, and 3 All-Defense teams. And so again, you could argue higher up on this list, but because of his shortcomings in the NBA playoffs and some big moments where, he missed some massive shots that could have changed the trajectory of his career, he'll just have to settle for the 41st spot for me. Number 40, one of the greatest point guards in NBA history, Chris Paul. Chris Paul was absolutely fantastic. Oddly enough, unless you're, a millennial, you probably don't realize how good Chris Paul truly was. Because he's one of those players who, oddly enough, had the prime of his career in his early 20s. I'm telling you, New Orleans Hornets Chris Paul was just different, man. Specifically, in the 2009 season, he finished 5th in the MVP voting, 6th in the DPOY voting, and was averaging about 23 points, 11 assists, 3 steals. Like, this guy was insane, and some of the numbers that he put up were amazing. Those New Orleans teams were some really dark horse candidates, but unfortunately, teams like the Lakers and the Denver Nuggets were on a mission those years. And then, obviously, he was pretty solid for the Los Angeles Clippers. Availability did become an issue for him as well, but you can't argue with his resume. I mean, led the NBA in assists per game 5 times in his career, led the NBA in steals per game 6 times in his career, and was a 12-time All-Star. Also, a 9-time All-Defender, which is among the highest in NBA history. And so, yeah, the only thing truly missing from his resume is really a championship. If he had that, you could probably argue that he's top 30, top 25. But because that is missing, he did have some opportunities, in 2018 with the Houston Rockets. But because of his injury, they weren't able to beat the Golden State Warriors at that time. And so, yeah, he probably should be higher up on this list. I mean, if he had played alongside Kobe Bryant and they didn't nix that trade, I imagine he would be higher up on this list. But for me, he'll have to settle for 40th. Number 39, just one spot ahead of Chris Paul, is another all-time great two-way point guard, and I'm talking about the glove, Gary Payton. Gary was just awesome. He was the Defensive Player of the Year winner in 1996. He ended up winning the championship in the twilight of his career with the Miami Heat in 2006. And the glove was just awesome as not just an offensive player, great passer, great lob passer, facilitator, one of the all-time great trash talkers, but really where he shined especially was defensively. This guy was a lockdown player. You could argue that nobody has ever defended Michael Jordan better than Gary Payton did in the 1996 NBA Finals. And so, yeah, this guy was a monster, putting up about as many as 24 points per game in 2000, while also locking up guys on the other end of the court and being a great facilitator as well. And so, yeah, I don't think Gary Payton often gets enough credit in the conversation of the greatest point guards in NBA history, and that's why I rank him 39th, which is a lot higher than most people would have him. Number 38 is one guy who is also very, very difficult to rank, and that is Scottie Pippen. The reason why Scottie is difficult to rank is because you could make the argument that he's the greatest Robin, he's the greatest second in command in NBA history. He won 6 NBA championships, but again, no finals MVPs. He was always kind of in the shadow of Michael Jordan. Now, when he did have his own opportunity to run his own team in 1994 with the Bulls, he did a very good job of that. He finished 3rd in the MVP voting, 4th in the DPOY voting, and he became one of the 5 players in NBA history to lead his team in all 5 stat categories over the course of a season. One of the greatest defensive players of all time, made a total of 10 all-defense teams. Somehow, the Defensive Player of the Year award always evaded Scottie, so it's amazing that he never actually did that. He could have been higher up on this list if he was a better offensive player. Even when he didn't have Michael Jordan playing alongside of him, he could only get as high as about 22 points per game. And I do think that was because he was a little bit limited offensively. He was great in transition. You know that dunk he had in the 1994 playoffs over Patrick Ewing. And so, yeah, he could take it coast to coast and he could finish at the rim. But as a perimeter shooter, as a guy in the post, as a guy with, not so great handle, he left a lot to be desired, and that's why Phil Jackson would often go to Tony Kukoc to take the last shot instead of Scottie when Michael wasn't around. Scottie Pippen did almost win a championship with the Portland Trail Blazers in 2000, which would have been really interesting if that had happened, if he had 7 championships to Michael Jordan's 6. With that being said, he was definitely more of just a team leader and a role player at that point in his career. I would make the argument that Rasheed Wallace was actually the best player on that team, but Scottie was still very, very impactful. And so, again, an all-time great legacy. Michael Jordan is not a 6-time champion without Scottie Pippen. And again, one of the greatest defensive players of all time, played the point forward in Phil Jackson and Tex Winter's triangle offense. So obviously he was massive. But I don't think you could have him much higher than 38 because, again, he was definitely a B player rather than an A player. Number 37 is one guy who's often disrespected in modern basketball discussions, and that's Bob Cousy. This guy was known as the Houdini of the hardwood. If you just go watch highlights of him playing, you can't deny the fact that he was one of the all-time great passers. He led the NBA in assists per game 8 times in his career. He won 6 championships with the Boston Celtics. He was the NBA's MVP in 1957, and he was a 13-time All-Star. Cousy was absolutely incredible. The biggest criticism of his game is he was not a very good field goal shooter, not a very good perimeter shooter. Just efficiency left a lot to be desired. Over the course of his career, he shot 37.5%, which again, during the 50s and 60s, that wasn't quite as bad because there was a lot of different factors. Some people even argue that the way the basketballs were made were different, and the rims weren't as reliable and things like that. But just generally speaking, field goal percentages were lower at that time. But even by league average standards, there's stuff to be left desired there. But as a passer and as a team player, this guy is among the best of the very best. And given his accolades, he's got to be at least decently high up your list. I think it's a travesty if you don't have him in the top 50. For myself personally, I've got him at 37th. Now going from one Boston Celtics legend to another, at number 36, I've got Kevin McHale. This guy had the nickname the Torture Chamber because of how he absolutely abused defenders in the post. I would say that Akeem Olajuwon has the greatest footwork of any big man in NBA history. But the guy in second place? Give me Kevin McHale. This guy was so polished. He had such great head fakes. He was such great with his footwork. Plenty of times when the Boston Celtics were just in half-court sets, they'd just dump it down to this guy and let him go to work. One of his advantages was the fact that he was 6 foot 10 inches tall and had a ridiculously long wingspan. Apparently his wingspan is rumored to be as long as 8 feet. And when you look at photos of him, it's not really surprising that those rumors were out there. I think 8 feet is probably a little bit of an exaggeration because that is very, very long for a 6'10 player. But he did have a ridiculously long wingspan. And then on top of it, on his jump shot, on his mid-range shooting, Kevin would lift the ball so freaking high above his head, so it was nearly impossible to block his shot, so he was just able to score at will. With the 1980s Boston Celtics, he won 3 NBA championships. He was a sixth man of the year winner twice with them and started his career as a sixth man and didn't really take the starting gig until about 1986, where they ended up becoming one of the greatest teams of all time. 6-time All-Defender and one of the toughest players in NBA history as well, because he was playing in the 1987 finals where he averaged like 26 points per game while playing literally on a broken foot. Like to this day, there is a awkward hitch in his walk because of the fact that he was playing on a broken foot for almost an entire season. And Kevin Garnett's talked about that, how, you know, McHale just never walks right because of that injury and the way he played through it. But you can never question his competitiveness. You can never question his toughness. And so, yeah, McHale's one of the all-time greats. At the time in the 1980s, some people were calling him the greatest power forward in NBA history. Since then, you've obviously had guys like Karl Malone, Tim Duncan, Giannis, so that conversation has really opened up. But just the fact that he was even considered for that at one point in NBA history really tells you how overlooked and underappreciated this legend is, because the Celtics and Larry Bird, he's not winning 3 championships on those teams without Kevin McHale. That's for darn sure. Number 35 is one of the greatest scorers in NBA history, and I'm talking about Rick Barry. Of all players in NBA history, the guy with the greatest scoring average for his career in the NBA Finals is this guy, Rick Barry. He was a 6'7" small forward. He helped his Golden State Warriors win the NBA championship in 1975. And outside of Jamal Wilkes, there wasn't really a ton of talent on that team. The 75 Warriors are sometimes referred to as the worst team to ever win the NBA championship. So in that sense, you could say that Rick Barry really carried them. The one thing about this guy that he's often criticized for is a lot of people, even some of his teammates in the years since, have talked about the fact that he was a bit of a selfish player. Famously, he did quit on his Warriors team in 1976, and so he is often critiqued for that. But he was one of the ultimate bucket getters, was the Rookie of the Year when he entered the ABA, because he went NBA, ABA, then back to the NBA. But he was the Rookie of the Year in 1966, and then he averaged as high as 35.6 points per game in 1967. So this dude was an absolute monster. Again, just questions about him as a teammate, but from an accolade standpoint, this guy has so much to his name. 12-time All-Star, was the All-Star Game MVP in 1967, Rookie of the Year in 66, made 6 All-NBA teams, led the league in steals in 1975, and then was the Finals MVP in 1975 as well. So yeah, definitely one of the all-time greats, definitely a guy who doesn't get enough credit for his role that he played in NBA history. At number 34 is George the Iceman Gervin. This man never won an NBA championship, but outside of that, his list of accolades do go on and on. He was a 12-time All-Star, and he won 4 scoring titles, which is the third most in NBA history, trailing only Wilt Chamberlain and Michael Jordan. One thing that's almost never mentioned about the Iceman as well is he should be in the conversation for the greatest shot-blocking 2 guards in NBA history. Usually you just hear about Michael Jordan and Dwayne Wade, but he could definitely be in this conversation as well. Specifically when he played for the Virginia Squires in 1974, he got as high as 1.8 blocks per game, and again, that's as a 2 guard. This guy had an insanely amazing layup package, ridiculously impressive score all around, and got as high as 33 points per game with the San Antonio Spurs in 1980. And for about 3 years straight, he was either second or third in the MVP race. And so, yeah, the Iceman was incredible. Again, not much postseason success to his name, but a lot of that had to do with the teams he played for. Because although San Antonio was a great franchise, later on, in the 70s and 80s, that wasn't exactly the case. But for myself personally, I've got him at 34. Number 33, Allen Iverson. Now, I'm going to have AI a lot higher than a lot of people would. I'm a big believer in Allen Iverson's greatness. In the modern NBA, a lot of people like to look at him through the lens of field goal percentages and efficiency, but you have to remember field goal percentages were lower at that time. Not only that, but he really carried that Philadelphia 76ers team offensively, so he got so much attention defensively from them. And you can't act like he wasn't great, because again, he won the MVP that year and took his team to the NBA Finals. where he was the only team that was able to take a game away from the Shaq and Kobe Lakers in 2001. So the proof is in the pudding. But AI was awesome, just like George Gervin, who I mentioned before him. Iverson led the league in scoring 4 times. One thing that's almost never mentioned, and he rarely gets credit for, is he also led the league in steals 3 times. I would not say that Allen Iverson was a great on-ball defender. I mean, even he has said as much. But he was good in the passing lanes, had pretty quick hands, just had ridiculous speed all around. And then his stamina was also amazing, as he was always among the league leaders in minutes per game. Like I said, that 2001 season is just legendary. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1997, and he did have 2 All-Star Game MVPs as well. And so AI was incredible, but like Russell Westbrook, who I talked about in the 51st spot, AI kind of needs the right team built around him. Although he did play with a superstar in Carmelo Anthony in Denver, I never felt like that was the right setup. Both guys are kind of similar. Both guys are subpar defensive players overall. So I don't think that was the right superstar to put alongside of him. So yeah, a lot of people might be critical for his efficiency and for the fact that he wasn't the greatest on-ball defender. But even with that being said, one of the all-time great scorers, one of the toughest players out there, and a very good passer as well. So I've got Iverson at 33. Number 32 is a player that you never hear talked about and getting much praise nowadays, mostly because he played from the 50s to the 60s, and Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain get all the credit from that era. But Bob Pettit, arguably the greatest Hawk in, Atlanta and St. Louis Hawks history. This guy was a 6'9" power forward / center, and his list of accolades goes on and on. He was an 11-time All-Star. He won 2 scoring titles. He was the rebounding champion in 1956. He won the NBA championship in 1958. And a lot of people don't know this, but the Hawks and Celtics actually had a pretty good rivalry. They were meeting up in the finals quite a bit between the late 1950s and the early 1960s. He was the Rookie of the Year in 1995. He made 11 All-NBA teams. And yeah, the way he just poured in stats was incredible. When he won the MVP in 1959, he was putting up 29 points per game and 16 rebounds. He got as high as 31 points per game in 1962 and as high as 20 rebounds per game in 1961. So yeah, Bob's one of the all-time greats. He's right there alongside of Dominique Wilkins in the conversation for the greatest Atlanta Hawk of all time. Speaking of which, at number 31, I have got Dominique Wilkins. The human highlight film was just absolutely insane. Unfortunately, a lot of people see him today as just a dunker, but you don't score nearly 30,000 points being simply a dunker. Dominique was a great all-around scorer. He had great footwork. He was a fantastic rebounder for a small forward. And the way he was able to get up and chase his own shot, he was very, very good at that. And eventually, he developed into an elite three-point shooter as well. This guy would consistently go toe-to-toe with Michael Jordan and Larry Bird in the NBA playoffs. And it was a toss-up on who was going to have the better night. Sometimes Michael Jordan would drop 50 points. Dominique even dropped 57 points on Michael's head one time. And so, yeah, these guys were awesome. He led the NBA in scoring in 1986. He made 7 All-NBA teams and was a 9-time All-Star. I do think if he had as talented of a supporting cast that Larry Bird had, like if you gave him Kevin McHale and you gave him Robert Parrish and Bill Walton off the bench, then Dominique's going to have multiple championships as well. He was that good. He was not an elite defensive player. That is the one major complaint against Dominique. But again, great rebounder, all-time great scorer, and obviously, you guys know who he is as a dunker. For the longest time, I believed he was the greatest dunker in NBA history, only till I saw Vince Carter with my own 2 eyes. But up until that point, that was Dominique's title. So yeah, just missing out barely on the top 30, but I definitely have him higher than most people do. Number 30, John Stockton. John Stockton, I'm a big believer in his talent. I think he unjustly gets too much criticism nowadays. There's this stupid narrative that his stats were artificially boosted by Utah statisticians, which is silly. I mean, even if you only go by his road assist per game numbers and literally just prorate all of his home games to his road numbers, he's still the all-time leader in assists by over 2,000 assists. Again, he leads that category by a country mile. He's also the all-time leader in steals by a country mile as well. 5-time All-Defender. He led the NBA in assists per game 9 times in his career, getting as high as 14.5 in 1990, while still putting up 17 points a game. So yeah, this guy was incredible. He was also really, really clutch in big game moments, unlike his teammate Karl Malone, who I will talk about on this list at some point. But yeah, I think John Stockton was fantastic. Unfortunately, he ran into Michael Jordan and the Chicago Bulls in 1997 and in 1998. And if he hadn't, he'd probably be a 2-time champion. So I do think he's one of the greatest, not the most flashy game, not the most spectacular type of player, but he was fundamentally sound and he got it done. Even if you think he doesn't have a left hand, that just makes me amazed by how great his right hand is. John Stockton was fantastic. Number 29, we got Hondo, John Havlicek. This is another guy I don't see ranked incredibly high, probably just because he gets overshadowed again by Bill Russell. His career did overlap a little bit with Bill, seeing how he started his career in 1962. So, he was 8-0 in the NBA Finals, but some of those seasons, Bill Russell was the best player. But with that being said, he was the best player on the Celtics when they won the NBA championship in 1974 and in 1976. He was also an elite two-way wing. Elite scorer, getting as high as 29 points per game in 1971, and he made 8 all-defense teams over the course of his career. This guy was always a triple-double threat when he was out there on the court. Fantastic shooter as well. And so, yeah, this guy is one of the all-time greats that should be recognized as such. But unfortunately, just playing for the Boston Celtics during that era, you tend to get overshadowed a little bit. Number 28. Dirk Nowitzki. Now, Dirk's a complicated one for me, and I have seen a lot of people rank Dirk much higher than this, and I do love Dirk. Again, just an incredible 7-foot power forward who had such fantastic range. In that way, he was really a pioneer of the NBA. I know there was great stretch fours before Dirk, but I mean, he took it to the next level. Fantastic score. Everybody talks about his incredible championship run in 2011, where he, along with his great team, defeated the super team Miami Heat. I was certainly not thinking they were going to win the championship. I thought the Lakers were going to beat them in 2011. I thought Miami Heat were going to beat them, and they went all the way to win the title with one of the greatest title runs of all time. But there are some criticisms to Dirk. Leading up to that 2011 championship, he was seen as a choker, and a lot of people have forgotten that. I mean, they did year after year. They were winning 50 to 60 games in the regular season, and they were seen as a team that could compete. But kind of like the Atlanta Hawks of the mid-2010s, at a certain point we started thinking they were fool's gold because we had seen them win 50 to 60 games year after year after year, and then failed in the playoffs. Most famously was the year he won the MVP award in 2007, where they got bounced in the first round by the 8th-seeded We Believe Warriors. The other thing is, Dirk, he was not a good defensive player. For the early years of his career, he was called Irk Nowitzki for the fact that there was no D in his game. And that's something that people tend to overlook. Like whenever the comparison happens between him and Kevin Garnett, I've always picked KG because I do believe KG was a more well-rounded player, was a much better defensive player, and it's not even close. So yeah, as far as Dirk's offensive game, an unstoppable fadeaway jumper, Finals MVP in 2011, 12 All-NBA teams, he's a legend. But for me, I do think top 20 or top 25 is a little bit too much because there are some glaring holes in his game that I do think some people ignore. So for me, he's going to have to settle for the 28th spot on this list. Number 27, Giannis Antetokounmpo. Giannis is fantastic. I mean, even if he retired today, he's got such a strong legacy. Again, he's about 31 years old now, but he's already done things that are just utterly incredible. For example, in 2020, he won the MVP and the Defensive Player of the Year in the same season. Only two other players have done that, which is Michael Jordan and Hakeem Olajuwon. That's some pretty damn good company. Beyond that, Giannis is an incredible scorer. He's averaged over 30 points per game 3 times in his career, which is actually the last 3 seasons. And based on how he's starting this season, he might do it a 4th time this year as well. Incredible rebounder. When you look at his combination of points and rebounds, he's been putting up some numbers that we hadn't seen since Moses Malone in the late 70s and early 80s. So just some incredible stuff. And then how can you not talk about his NBA championship in 2021, and especially how he closed that out with his 50-point performance. It was one of the greatest finals performances of all time. And so again, 9-time All-Star, 2-time MVP, 5 All-Defense teams. You could go on and on about this guy's greatness. The only really glaring issue with his game is you just kind of wish he was a better perimeter shooter. That's definitely something that really could have benefited him and made him even more unstoppable. But with that being said, to be ranked this high by the age of 31, like, this guy's going to continue to climb up the list as he gets higher and higher on the all-time lists. And who knows, maybe there's even another championship or 2 in his future. Still in the conversation for the best player in the league today. So yeah, the Greek Freak is in fact that. He's a freak and he should be recognized as such. Number 26, Kevin Garnett. I don't know if this is a low or high ranking for KG. I think if he hadn't spent the vast majority of the early years of his career with Minnesota, then I do think he would be much, much higher on this list. I think people think the gap between him and Tim Duncan is massive, and at least when they were both in their primes, I didn't feel like that about them as individual players. I actually think it was much, much closer. But again, there's a difference between playing for the stable organization of the San Antonio Spurs with talent around you and playing for the most losing franchise in NBA history, which is objectively the Minnesota Timberwolves. With that being said, his first year in Boston, when he got there for the 07-08 season, he immediately won the Defensive Player of the Year. I do think Doc Rivers got most of the credit for how good that team was defensively initially, but in my opinion, Kevin Garnett was the true defensive leader of that team. And so yeah, KG was awesome. In 2003, he led his team in all 5 stat categories: points, rebounds, assists, blocks, and steals. One of only 5 players to ever do that. On top of that, he led the league in rebounding 4 times in his career, and also 12 all-defense teams, which is the second most in NBA history, only behind Tim Duncan, who has 15. And so KG was just an absolute beast, is high on many of the all-time lists. But again, I just feel like he should have been able to win more, before he had got to Boston, but he didn't get to Boston until he was in his early 30s. So unfortunately, he missed a lot of those opportunities where Wally Szczerbiak was the best talent that he had to support him. And so again, big believer in KG, the big ticket. I have him in 26th. I think there's an argument that he could even be higher on the list, but based on what he achieved in his career, I think this is a good spot for him. Number 25. This is going to seem like a hot take to a lot of people, but hear me out. Number 25 for me is George Mikan. George Mikan was, in many ways, the first ever NBA superstar. And when you look at how many points he scored for his team, it was some of the largest percentages of a team's points that we've ever seen in the league. Now, people are going to say, how can you rank George Mikan in the top 25? Well, I think there's something to be said about how you dominated the competition that you were given in your era. I understand that if you drop him cold turkey in the modern league, he's probably not going to play that well. Why? The game's changed so much. 2, he can't really handle the basketball that well. 3, we've learned so much, like the jump shot. Like, they weren't even jumping on a lot of their shots back then. But with that being said, the George Mikan drill was something that he started. He had fantastic hook shots with both his right and left hand. And 3-time scoring champion, and when he was leading the league in scoring, it wasn't even close. He was the rebounding champion in 1953, and he just won championship after championship after championship. First ever team to three-peat in NBA history. This guy only played 7 years in the NBA, officially in the NBA, but absolutely dominated. And so again, if you are looking at this objectively, recognizing the way he dominated competition and not comparing eras and talking about how he'd do if you put him in the league today, guys, he genuinely has a case for being like a GOAT conversation case. Genuinely, when you look at how many championships he won in a career as short as he had and how much he dominated his competition. And so originally, when I first did my 50 greatest players of all time several years ago, I had him ranked something like 44th. And honestly, I think looking back on that, that was pretty disrespectful, because I was looking at it a lot from the lens of what his field goal percentage was, which, over the course of his career, he shot 40.4%, which, believe it or not, for that era was actually pretty good. But if you think about just how much he dominated the competition, if you're going to apply that same logic to 60s basketball, to 70s basketball, then it's only fair to do it to 50s and 40s basketball as well. So for that reason, I gotta put him at the very least, in my top 25. I think anything lower than that is disrespectful, considering how much he dominated the competition. Number 24, Karl Malone. I've seen a lot of lists rank Karl Malone much higher than this, and don't get me wrong, Karl Malone was a great player. He's very high on the NBA's all-time scoring list. Over the course of his career, he averaged 25 points per game, 10 rebounds, and 4 assists. And listen, that's a great, individual season. He did that over his career. 14-time All-Star, 4 All-Defense teams. And to be fair, Karl Malone's legacy is very, very much hindered by the existence of Michael Jordan. If Michael Jordan did not exist, Karl Malone would probably be a 2-time NBA champion. Along with that, Karl Malone would have gone from 0 scoring titles to 5. He was the runner-up for the scoring title 5 times to Michael Jordan. So for a long time, before Tim Duncan came along, Karl Malone was in the conversation for the greatest power forward in NBA history. But with that being said, I would not put him any higher than 24th, and here's why. I've seen people do it on their lists. Yes, he was a 2-time MVP, but Malone was kind of a playoff choker at times. Think about it. In 1997, in Game 1 of the NBA Finals, yes, Michael Jordan hit the game-winning shot over Brian Russell, but Karl Malone made that possible by missing both free throws. That's where Scottie Pippen said, "The mailman doesn't deliver on Sundays." Along with that, you think of Game 6 of the 1998 NBA Finals. Who was it that was in the post and turned the ball over that enabled Michael Jordan to hit the most iconic jump shot in NBA history? Again, that was Karl Malone. And Karl Malone had a tendency to turn the ball over quite a bit, as he is second all-time in turnovers, trailing only LeBron James. And to me, that's even more egregious than like LeBron leading the league all-time in turnovers. I understand both guys had longevity, but for you to be second all-time in turnovers as a power forward, to me, that's crazy, because a point guard, they're facilitators. They got to get the ball to guys. LeBron was often the floor general for his teams, so it's only natural that point guards have the most turnovers on their teams. But power forward, that's a rarity. And so, I mean, a lot of that was just from either traveling, offensive fouls, because Karl Malone loved to throw those elbows around. So was he a great player? Definitely. Would I rather have a power forward like Charles Barkley over Karl Malone? Because that's usually the debate among those 2 great power forwards of that era. Yeah, give me peak Barkley over peak Malone. And I don't think that's much of a conversation when you look at how they stepped it up or did not step it up in the NBA playoffs. So again, Karl Malone for me, 24th. Some people think he's top 20. For me, that's way too much. Number 23. He's quickly becoming one of the most underrated big men in NBA history, and I'm talking about the Admiral, David Robinson. David was just incredible. He came into the NBA as a very, very old rookie, starting his career at about the age of 24 due to the fact that he served in the Navy. With that being said, just an incredible two-way player, led the league in scoring, averaging nearly 30 points per game in 1994. He also averaged an insane 4.5 blocks per game in 1992, as basically the only superstar on his team for the San Antonio Spurs in the 1990s. Year after year after year, they were winning between 50 to 60 games. He made 8 all-defense teams. He was the Defensive Player of the Year in 1992. Unfortunately, he's just very much overshadowed by Hakeem Olajuwon, and to a certain extent, for good reason. When they met up in the NBA playoffs, we all remember what happened. Like, Hakeem Olajuwon very much owned David Robinson. But I think that has aged so badly in Robinson's case that people are starting to overlook this guy way too much. Again, all-time great two-way player. A lot of people don't have him anywhere near their top 25, and to me that is insanely egregious given how good he was as both an offensive player and a defensive player. And another thing that people forget is, yes, Tim Duncan was the best player on the San Antonio Spurs ever since he was drafted. Basically when he was drafted up until like the late, 2009 season, 2010, that sort of thing. But a lot of people write off the impact that David Robinson had for those teams. For example, in 1998, David Robinson was 7th in the MVP voting and was 3rd in the DPOY voting. When they won the championship in 1999, David Robinson was still averaging 16 points and 10 rebounds. He was and 4th in the Defensive Player of the Year voting, even ahead of his teammate Tim Duncan. And so, again, I don't think the Admiral gets enough credit for either his prime or when he was a role player helping out Tim Duncan win championships. And so, yeah, the Admiral definitely worthy of a top 23 spot. Number 22, I'm a big believer in this guy. You could definitely make the argument that he's the greatest player who's never won a championship, and I'm talking about the round mound of rebound, Charles Barkley. Barkley was just awesome, man. His prime years, I do believe, was when he was in Philly. Yes, he won his MVP year. He won his MVP when he was with Phoenix in 1993. But I think that's mostly a recognition of how many regular season games they won, because statistically and athletically, he was very much better in Philadelphia for sure. Specifically, in 1987, he averaged 23 points per game, about 15 rebounds, and 5 assists, 2 steals, and 1.5 blocks. A year later, 28, 12, 3, 1.3, and 1.3. And during his prime days in Philly, he was consistently shooting around 60% from the field. One of the greatest rebounders of all time, one of the greatest transition players of all time. When he played on the Dream Team with Magic Johnson, Larry Bird, and Michael Jordan, sure, those 3 legends got all of the iconic photos. But ask anybody who was watching the 1992 Barcelona Olympics, and they will tell you that Charles Barkley was the real MVP of that team. Then, anytime he got to the NBA playoffs and he met up with Michael Jordan, yes, Michael Jordan was the fastest gun, as he said in the Last Dance documentary, where Jordan averaged like 41 points in the finals against Barkley. But every single time Jordan and Barkley met up in the finals, Barkley put up some insane numbers of his own. Yes, he never won a championship, and Shaquille O'Neal is always letting him hear about it, but he didn't have the kind of talent alongside of him to try to help him win that Shaq had. He didn't have a young Kobe. He didn't have a prime Dwayne Wade. By the time he finally got to Hakeem Olajuwon and Clyde Drexler with the Rockets, he was old, he was out of shape, it was the twilight of his career. I think Barkley is just an absolutely amazing player and definitely has the argument for being the greatest player to never win a championship. Number 21, Dwayne Wade. Flash was absolutely incredible. He was the NBA scoring champion in 2009. He made 3 all-defense teams. He's in the argument with Michael Jordan and, as I mentioned earlier, George Gervin for the title of the greatest shot-blocking two-guard in NBA history. Obviously, you guys all know about his legendary Finals MVP in the 2006 season, where he basically carried that team to defeat the Dallas Mavericks. And I know, he got a lot of whistles and he shot a lot of free throws that series. With that being said, he hit big shots, he was very aggressive offensively, and he did attack the basket quite a bit, so I don't tend to think that whole thing was legitimately rigged. Let me know what you think in the comment section, but he played absolutely incredibly in that championship series. On top of that, he's a 3-time NBA champion because he did contribute a lot for the championship teams in 2012 and 2013 as well. And so yes, Dwayne Wade is one of the all-time greats. Unfortunately, he was never able to get an MVP trophy, but he came close a couple times. And an all-time great two-way player that had lots of longevity as well. So just outside of top 20 for me, but you could definitely make a strong argument for him being a top 20 player. Number 20, Elgin Baylor. One of the most underrated players in the history of the league, partially because he played for the Los Angeles Lakers, who have an insanely rich history. To this day, Elgin Baylor still holds the NBA record for the most points scored in an NBA Finals game when he dropped 61 points against the Boston Celtics in 1962. That year, throughout the regular season, he averaged 38.3 points per game. On top of that, as a 6'5" small forward, Baylor got as high as 19.8 rebounds per game in 1961. This guy was so transcendent. I mean, Kobe has paid tons of respect to this guy in the past for how he was really a pioneer of the game. His layup package was incredible. His ability to finish around the basket. Just picture Dennis Rodman as an elite rebounder, but with the skills of Elgin Baylor, with the scoring ability of Elgin Baylor. That's who Baylor was. He was like Rodman on steroids as an offensive player. He was the NBA's Rookie of the Year in 1959. He was a 10-time All-NBA player and made 11 All-Star teams. Unfortunately, he never technically won an NBA championship because he only played in the first 9 regular season games of the Lakers championship season in 1972. But again, they came close many times, but unsurprisingly, he did lose to Bill Russell and the Boston Celtics in the NBA Finals quite a few times. But over the course of his career, this is his entire career, he averaged 27.4 points, 13.5 rebounds, and 4.3 assists. Just insane stuff. And so, as I said earlier, Charles Barkley is in the argument for the greatest player to never win a championship. But if you ask me straight up who is, I think it's Elgin Baylor. He's got my vote. This one is sure to trigger some of the younger basketball fans, but number 19, I've got Kevin Durant. I've seen KD on a lot of lists where he's as high as 11th or 12th on the all-time list. And for me, that is just way too high. KD is incredible. He has the talent to be a top 10 player all time, but the mentality, not as much, and that's why I don't see it. 15-time All-Star, was a 4-time scoring champion and a 2-time NBA champion, and yes, he was the Finals MVP of both of those teams. With that being said, he did join the 73-9 Warriors, which were in the conversation of the greatest team of NBA history before he joined them, and he replaced Harrison Barnes, who was throwing up bricks in the NBA playoffs in 2016, and it was a seamless fit. And again, that was a team that lost in the NBA Finals in Game 7 by just 4 points. I believe that was the easiest road to a championship that a superstar has ever had, and ever since then, Kevin Durant's been gaslighting us into thinking it's the exact opposite, and somehow it was one of the hardest. As an individual talent, you can't deny it. He's a 7-foot player who can score inside the paint, he can score from the mid-range, and he can shoot 3-point shots. With that being said, he has had talented teams before Golden State and after Golden State, and he's had super teams. He's even handpicked some of these teams, and he's still been unable to win championships. I don't think he's a leader, and I don't think he tries to be a leader. He just wants to be a guy who shows up and hoops. And honestly, you can make a ton of money that way. You could be a great player that way. But if you want to get into the select group of the greatest players of all time, you got to have that extra bit of leadership. You got to have that extra bit of drive, and you can't be using excuses as to why you didn't win other places. When they had the opportunity to win in 2016 in Game 7 and in Game 6, he came up small, and they blew a 3-1 lead to the Golden State Warriors, where they in all likelihood would have won the NBA championship that year if he performs well in either Game 6 or Game 7. So for me, KD is one of the greatest talents in NBA history, but to be a top 15 player all time, you got to have some of that extra stuff when it comes to leadership. Number 18, Isaiah Thomas. I absolutely hated this point guard growing up as a kid. I watched my dad's VHS tapes of the bad boy Detroit Pistons just acting like violent players and using dirty tactics to try to be a competitive team. But now in the years since, I cannot deny his talent. He was a 2-time NBA champion. He was the Finals MVP in 1990. He led the NBA in assists per game in 1985, and he was averaging a stupid 13.9 per game, which is the highest in NBA history for anyone not named John Stockton. This guy could score 40 points, completely taking over a game as a scorer, and then he could get 20 assists the next game, and you wouldn't be surprised. Isaiah was ridiculously clutch. I've talked about it a lot recently, but in the 1988 NBA Finals, he dropped 25 points in a single quarter alone. To this day, that is the most points scored in a single quarter of an NBA Finals game. And again, he did that on a swollen ankle. And so this guy was absolutely legendary. If it wasn't for the phantom foul and the very sketchy ending to Game 7 of the 1988 NBA Finals, he might have won 3 straight championships in a run where he defeated Michael Jordan and Scottie Pippen and the Chicago Bulls, Magic Johnson and the Los Angeles Lakers, and Larry Bird's Celtics. This guy had to beat the best of the very best and won 2 championships, and maybe if he wasn't screwed over, he might have won 3 straight championships. This guy's incredible. I don't know why he doesn't get more credit nowadays. Partially, it's probably because people just didn't like him as much. He's really just seen as a footnote to Michael Jordan's greatness. But again, they did eliminate Michael Jordan 3 straight years. They eliminated him 3 straight years out of the playoffs, while occasionally taking out Magic Johnson and Larry Bird as well. So if you're looking at strength of competition on top of his accolades, Isaiah should be top 20 for sure. Unfortunately, I seem to be one of the few who actually have him that high. Number 17, the Big O, Oscar Robertson. Oscar Robertson was insane. People have described this guy as the Tim Duncan of the point guard position, and he was a large point guard, especially back then, standing at 6'5" tall. He led the NBA in assists per game 6 times in his career. He's most famously remembered for his triple-double season in 1962, where he averaged 31 points per game, 11 assists, and 12.5 rebounds. With that being said, year after year after year to start his career, he was hovering around a 30-point triple-double. If you look at his first 5 years in his NBA career, over the totality of those 5 years, he averaged a triple-double over that stretch. Oscar Robertson also won the championship alongside of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar on the Milwaukee Bucks in 1971, a team that is fondly remembered as one of the greatest teams in NBA history. He was also the league MVP in 1964, which is a time where Bill Russell and Wilt Chamberlain were also dominating the league, so that is quite impressive. So Oscar, for a lot of people, he is top 15, maybe even top 12 on the all-time list, but for me, he'll have to settle for the 17th spot. Number 16, Nikola Jokic. Now listen, I know a lot of people are going to think for an active player, it is way too early to put Jokic this high on the list. But personally, I do not think that's the case. He had a legendary, absolutely legendary championship run where he led the Denver Nuggets to their only championship in franchise history. He's now up to, 3 MVP awards. You could even argue that he should have won 5 MVPs straight with how some of these recent voting has gone. He had a triple-double season in 2025 where he averaged 29.6 points, 12.7 rebounds, and 10.2 assists. On top of that, he was among the league leaders in field goal percentage and three-point percentage. He's without question the greatest passing big man in NBA history. For a while, Bill Walton was in that conversation. Arvydas Sabonis was in that conversation. Wilt Chamberlain was in that conversation. But at this point, he has been destroying the assist per game numbers for the center position year after year after year that I have to say it's just Nikola Jokic outright. In that playoff run, where his Nuggets won the championship, he averaged a triple-double over the course of those entire playoffs. When you look at player efficiency rating, true shooting percentage, this guy is constantly breaking records and advanced stats. Is he just a decent defensive player? Yeah. Honestly, if he was an elite defensive player, like a defensive player of the year candidate year after year, he'd probably be top 10 already. But I have him as the 16th greatest player of all time already, based purely on the fact that he is one of the greatest offensive players that we have ever seen, and he continues to get better and better seemingly every single year. At number 15, I've got the doctor, Julius Erving. At this point, hopefully you've been able to tell that I'm definitely including ABA success in this 100 greatest players of all time rankings. And if that's the case with Julius Erving, I mean, some could even make the argument that he's a top 10 player of all time. Now, between both leagues, he was a 4-time MVP and a 3-time champion. He won the NBA championship with the Philadelphia 76ers in 1983, which I am on record calling the most underrated team in NBA history. They only lost 1 game in the playoffs. That team was stacked. And then in the ABA, he won 2 championships. He was All-Defender in 1976, made 5 All-NBA teams. Between both leagues, he was a 16-time All-Star and had over 30,000 points. And so this guy doesn't get enough credit. Similarly to guys like, Dwayne Wade and George Gervin, like we talked about earlier, Julius Erving was a great athletic shot blocker as well. He got as high as 2.4 blocks per game in 1974, which is just insane for a 6'7" player. And so the doctor, he was so ridiculously athletic, one of the greatest dunkers of all time, just glided through the air. A lot of people will tell you, who are old enough to have watched him play, that he was Michael Jordan before Michael Jordan. And so, yeah, Dr. J, personally for me, top 15. If you take away his ABA stats and accolades, you could say he's lower than that. But personally, I don't feel like that's fair to ABA players. It's not their fault, that there was 2 leagues at the time. Ahead of him by 1 spot is number 14, Moses Malone. Moses Malone also spent a significant amount of time in the NBA, and he's definitely the greatest Malone to ever play in the NBA. Moses Malone doesn't get enough credit. He was a bit of a journeyman, played for so many different teams. I mean, if you just look at Basketball Reference, look at how many different kinds of jerseys he had on, it's pretty crazy. But again, he was an NBA champion with the Philadelphia 76ers in 1983. He won 3 MVPs and is actually the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back MVP awards on 2 separate teams. And as a rebounder, he was insane. Led the NBA in rebounding 6 times. But if you look at the gap between him and second place for the most offensive rebounds in NBA history, that's what's truly insane. And just think about all those second chance opportunities that he provided for his team. You want to talk about having an impact on winning, giving your team that many extra opportunities. Yeah, that's pretty insane. I would say the peak of his individual career was in 1981 with the Houston Rockets. He averaged 31 points per game, 15 rebounds per game, and 1.5 blocks. Just absolutely monstrous numbers, and again, probably the most underrated center in NBA history, if you ask me. Number 13 is the Loco, Jerry West. This guy had such a smooth, sweet, and solid game that was way ahead of his time. He had an incredible pull-up jumper. He was a lethal scorer, but a pretty dang good passer as well. And he was the logo, and he was called Mr. Clutch for good reason. Yes, he was 1-8 in the NBA Finals. A big part of that was the fact that he kept going against the superior Boston Celtics, who had so many Hall of Famers on their team. But again, he was a Finals MVP in the 1969 Finals while playing for the losing team. That's how much people could recognize how solid he was, even in his losing performances. Now, the one thing that's usually missed about West is how solid of a defensive player he was. It's so unfortunate that steals were not tracked until the final season of his career, but in the final season of his career, at the age of 35, he averaged 2.6 steals per game. If those steals had always been tracked, he'd probably be among the league or the all-time leaders in steals per game. He also made 5 all-defense teams, but all-defense team selections also did not exist until basically he was in his 30s. So in reality, he should probably have 11 or 12 all-defense team selections. Number 12. A lot of people are going to think this is controversial, and this is where we start getting into the dicey decisions, the ones that really trigger people. I've got Shaquille O'Neal at number 12. Was Shaq awesome? Absolutely. Was he dominant, the most physically dominant player we've ever seen? Absolutely. Some will say Wilt Chamberlain, but Wilt Chamberlain dominated a little bit more with grace. There was a fadeaway and a finger roll to Wilt's game, while Shaq was mostly brute force. The problem with Shaq, and the reason why I don't have him higher up on the list, is because there were issues with his work ethic. He didn't make the most of his God-given abilities. And what I'm talking about is stuff like being too prideful to truly work on becoming a better free throw shooter. He didn't even try Rick Barry's underhand free throw method because he thought it looked stupid. Shaquille O'Neal would often come into, training camp or start the NBA season extremely overweight. There were just some serious issues with his work ethic, which hindered his longevity. Now, don't get me wrong, when he was at his best, he was incredible. And if you want to talk about Shaquille O'Neal at his peak, to me, he's one of the top 5 greatest players of all time if you're just looking at peak, because 2000 to 2002, his dominance, especially in the NBA Finals, was utterly insane. But again, there was a lot left to be desired, and in certain situations, like late in fourth quarters of games, Kobe Bryant was leaned upon heavily to close out those games because Shaq couldn't be trusted to make his free throws at the free throw line. Now, Shaq always said, I make them when I need to. But if you look at the numbers, whether it was the fourth quarter or the rest of the game, he was pretty much a career 50% free throw shooter. And so, there were answers for him, at least somewhat defensively. And if Shaq was an 80% free throw shooter, he probably would have been the greatest player of all time because there would have been no answer for him whatsoever. So again, if anything, Shaq's own ego held him back, and that's why I think he's great. That's why I think he was dominant, but not quite top 10 level like some of these other guys. Right after Shaq, at the number 11 spot, I've got Hakeem Olajuwon. Now, you can argue that Hakeem Olajuwon is the most skilled and all-around talented big man in NBA history. He won the Defensive Player of the Year twice, obviously had back-to-back NBA championships in 1994 and in 1995. He almost had 2 quadruple doubles in a single month. And so Hakeem's insane, obviously a wonderful mid-range shooter, the NBA's all-time leader in blocked shots, and there's not really many flaws to his game. He's the only player in NBA history to win back-to-back championships without a single All-Star on his team. Now, some people might say, Clyde Drexler was an All-Star in 1995. Maybe All-Star caliber, but he literally wasn't an All-Star. And so Hakeem was incredible. But again, 2 championship rings just to his name. From an accolade standpoint, from a championship standpoint, not quite up to the standard of some of the guys ahead of him. Is that fair? Maybe not, because it's not like he played with a ton of other Hall of Famers throughout his career. He did play, with Charles Barkley and Clyde Drexler and eventually Scottie Pippen, but most of those stars were at the tail end of their career. Michael Jordan, you could argue, definitely had more longevity than Hakeem in that way. And so maybe that is a fair criticism against Hakeem. But again, the dream is incredible. There's nothing wrong with being 11 all time. At this point, it starts getting very competitive and very, very difficult. Number 10, Steph Curry. Steph Curry has officially moved into my top 10. I get it. Unlike Hakeem Olajuwon, he's not the most incredible defensive player, but offensively, he's one of the greatest players that this league has ever seen. Not just as an individual player, not just as a scorer, not just as a three-point shooter, but his gravitational pull on offense, the way Steph Curry makes his teams better. Before Kevin Durant, with Kevin Durant, and after Kevin Durant. In my opinion, he was the real dynasty all along. And Steph, his legendary 2016 season, how can you forget it? He made over 400 three-pointers in a season at a time where nobody else had made over 300. He's just so efficient from the free throw line, from the field, all those things. And even in that 2016 season, he did lead the league in steals per game. I think there are so few players who have an effect on the game like Steph that you have to give him extra points for that. If you want to talk about a guy who makes his teammates better just with his mere presence on the court, it's Steph Curry, man, because there is so much attention that the defense has to give him. So for me, and his 4 championship rings, and the success that he's had on the Olympic level and the championship level with all the records he set, I think it's just good enough to be in the top 10 at this point. Number 9, Tim Duncan. Now, I love Tim Duncan. Even as a Lakers fan, I love Tim Duncan. I'm seeing some people putting him in the top 5, and to me, that is a little bit much. Duncan was never a dominant, even elite offensive player. Defensively, he has the most all-defense team selections in NBA history with 15. Now, he did never win a Defensive Player of the Year award. I'm not sure if that's exactly fair. He was definitely worthy of it a couple of seasons. Duncan's claim to fame was how well he played in the postseason, especially in the 2003 season where he went on to win the championship and almost got a quadruple-double in the final game of that season. Just amazing, amazing stuff from the big fundamental. And even later on, where Kawhi Leonard was their best player when they won a championship, Tim Duncan was still impactful. Even into the twilight of his career, Tim Duncan was still impactful. His leadership, his influence, his example, definitely a top 10 career for sure. Number 8, a lot of people are going to be surprised by this, but at number 8, I have Wilt Chamberlain. And some people are going to ask, how has Wilt Chamberlain fallen so far on your list? Listen, if you're going purely by the regular season, Wilt Chamberlain is the greatest player in NBA history. We know he averaged over 50 points per game. We know he averaged 25 rebounds that same season in 1962. He had ridiculous efficiency numbers later on in his career, MVP awards, all kinds of records, the 100-point game. One thing people never talk about with a 100-point game is that was his 4th straight game with at least 60 points. And so Wilt is insane with all the records he set. But with that being said, there is no question that from the regular season to the postseason, there was a massive drop-off in production. And don't get me wrong, those numbers were still incredible. But I think for too long, I've been giving Wilt a pass for that. Bill Russell, for example, was not the scorer that Wilt Chamberlain was. But in Game 7s, Bill Russell was 10-0. And several of those Game 7s were one-possession games against Wilt Chamberlain. If the difference is just one possession, just comes down to one possession, and Wilt couldn't make that difference, you really can't use the overall talent as an excuse. You know what I'm saying? Like, yes, the Celtics were more talented, they had more Hall of Famers, but at the same time, when everything mattered the most, Bill Russell was usually the one who performed his best, unlike Wilt Chamberlain. So I will call Wilt the greatest regular season player to have ever lived. But unfortunately, I think the most important thing when we're ranking the greatest of the greatest players is how they performed when things mattered the most. And for that reason, for that shift in thinking, that's why Wilt Chamberlain has dropped the most on my list. Still have tons of credit, still have tons of respect for him. I'm still gonna simp for him on this channel and make tons of videos just singing his praises. But unfortunately, he didn't have that competitive gene to the same extent that Bill Russell did. Number 7, Kareem Abdul-Jabbar. Now I'm probably really triggering people, but I have Kareem much lower than a lot of people do. And I understand how great Kareem was. He was one of the greatest scorers in NBA history because of his skyhook shot. He had arguably the most indefensible shot in NBA history. With that being said, the reason I have Kareem lower than most people do is because when Kareem was the man, he didn't often have much success as, say, Magic Johnson did when he was the man. Kareem won one NBA championship before Magic Johnson came along. Even in his MVP season in 1976, Kareem's Lakers didn't even make the playoffs. When you look at that Showtime Lakers team, who was the engine of that team? That was Magic. Kareem was thinking about retirement before Magic Johnson came along. So don't get me wrong, he's great. But I'm not the biggest fan of longevity statistics. For me, what matters is the impact you had on the floor, how much you made your teammates better, and how much your direct impact led to winning. And I think that Magic Johnson was a much better winner than Kareem Abdul-Jabbar was. So as great as he is, and again, I don't think it's disrespectful to say you were the 7th greatest player in NBA history, but for me, this was not a guy who could do, say, what Magic Johnson did in 1991, where he took his team to the NBA Finals as, pretty much the only top 10 player on the team. Kareem benefited a lot from having the GOAT point guard on his team, which is why he's only 7th on my list. Now, if I haven't triggered enough people, I'm really going to get people going with this next one, and that is because I have LeBron James at 6th. Yes, I know, LeBron James is 6th, but there's reasons for this. For one, I think LeBron has benefited a lot from playing on several different super teams. He has built a lot of different teams and basically handpicked who many of his teammates are. And again, he's won 4 championships in about 23 seasons. And for me, that matters. I'm not just looking at longevity, and longevity is LeBron and Kareem's strongest trait. But at the same time, how much did you dominate when you were at the top of your game? It also makes me think, what if I was a general manager? What if you could pick any one of these players from NBA history? If I was to take LeBron James, at max, he's going to win me 2 championships with my team before he goes somewhere else. That's what the history of his legacy has told us. He won 2 with Miami, he won 1 with Cleveland, and he won 1 with Los Angeles. And so for me, that's not a level of dominance that would really pushes me to think that he's a top 5 player of all time. Yes, he has the stats. He has the all-time scoring lead. He has, he's going to be one of the top 3, probably by the time he's retired, in all-time assists. But he's also the all-time leader in turnovers. He's also the all-time leader in missed shots. LeBron's just the leader of a lot of things that come from accumulative statistics. But if I'm looking at individual dominance, how much did they dominate when they were at their best? I can't forget about the 2011 NBA Finals, where he had a finals game where he only scored 8 points, where he was outplayed by Jason Terry. And I'm not trying to just hate on LeBron and Kareem and that sort of thing, but when you say where a guy's ranked, and if it's much lower or much higher, you kind of have to explain why that is. Was the 2016 NBA Finals one of the greatest performances we've ever seen? Absolutely. Was LeBron absolutely nuts in the 2018 season where he carried his Cavs to the NBA Finals? For sure. But there's a lot more to his legacy, and for me, what matters is how much did you dominate your era. And when I'm looking at 4 championships in 23 seasons, when you had as many opportunities as he had, to me, that's not quite top 5 material. Number 5, Bill Russell. I believe Bill Russell is one of the guys who's actually in the exact same spot that I had him last time. And the thing about Bill Russell is his biggest critique is that he's not an all-time great offensive player. He didn't score a ton of points. He averaged about 40% from the field. But Bill Russell's big belief is that the way he played led to winning basketball. It led to championships. He was 11-1 in the NBA Finals, and in that one loss, he was injured. Bill Russell, as I said earlier, was 10-0 in Game 7s. If you look at the history of how he played when everything mattered the most, he was always clutch. And if you look at how much he dominated his era, I get the Defensive Player of the Year award did not exist during his time, but if it did, he genuinely might have won 8, 9, 10 DPOYs. Genuinely. So for me, if he was a 30 points per game scorer, he'd be the greatest player of all time. Absolutely. But he did have the benefit of leaning upon guys like Bailey Howell, John Havlicek, Sam Jones. He could have some of those guys pick up the slack for him on the offensive end. And so that's the reason why I can't put him any higher than number 5. But again, if he had that, he'd be the consensus greatest player of all time. Number 4, Kobe Bryant. People are going to ask, why has Kobe moved up so much from your list? Because I think at one point I even had him ranked as low as 8th. But the reason why is because I think I've just grown to appreciate the amount of competition that Kobe had to deal with. For example, in 2009, even in their finals run in 2008, and in 2010, the amount of injuries he had to deal with, the amount of injuries that the Lakers had to deal with, like not having Andrew Bynum and still going on to win the championship. Or how about Kobe going on to lead his team to win the NBA championship in 2010 while having a broken index finger? I understand there's certain guys on this list, like Kareem, like LeBron James, who have better stats than Kobe Bryant. But as far as Kobe's mentality, how elite he was as a defensive player, the amount of competition he had to put up with, and people want to say, oh, well, he had Shaq. Well, yeah, but he was still a major part for winning those first 3 championships, and then he added 2 championships after that, and that's the equivalent of what Akeem Olajuwon accomplished in his entire career. So to me, that shouldn't even be a valid criticism, because at times during their title runs in 2001 and 2002 especially, Kobe at times looked just as good as Shaquille O'Neal. And so given how dominant he was as a two-way player, given the amount of injuries and the amount of difficult things that he had to push through that most guys in today's game don't even dare trying to push through, I think Kobe has to be a top 4 talent in NBA history. Maybe I'll change my mind in a month or 6 months from now or a year from now. But at this point, I think my appreciation for Kobe's legacy, him as a leader, his impact and his drive is pretty much higher than it's ever been before. It's not that like suddenly his passing, made me shoot him up on the all-time list, because I did some rankings after that anyway, and I didn't have him this high. But it more just has to do with like Kobe did the extra things to get his team to win. Kobe toughened up Pau Gasol. Kobe got guys to spend more time in the gym instead of more time in the club. He made guys like Sasha Vujacic better. He made guys like Derek Fisher better. He drove them to be more determined and stronger as players and as leaders. And to me, that is more important than the stat sheet itself. So that's why I got Kobe at number 4. Number 3, Magic Johnson, Showtime. Magic Johnson, again, I talked about making your teammates better. I talked about the impact on winning. Magic Johnson went to the NBA Finals in 1991 after already being a 5-time NBA champion, and after James Worthy was hurt, and after Byron Scott was hurt, he still had a 20-assist game in the NBA Finals with like Vlade Divac as his best teammate. Just insane. Magic's rookie season, starting at center in place of Kareem Abdul-Jabbar, dropping about 42 points, 12 rebounds, 7 assists. Just insane. The instant Magic came into the league, he was making his teammates better. He was performing at his best when it mattered the most. Yes, he did have the tragic Johnson NBA Finals, but outside of that, Magic was always killing it. And so he was the quintessential winner. He was the ultimate example of making his teammates better, and for that reason, I've got Magic in my top 3. Number 2 is arguably the most complete player in NBA history. I've made videos talking about that. I'm talking about Larry Bird. Larry Bird had to play in the gauntlet that was the Eastern Conference in the 1980s. They had the bad boy Pistons, they had the super stacked Philadelphia 76ers, they had the 60-win Milwaukee Bucks some seasons, and Larry Bird still came out of that era, even going against Magic Johnson's Lakers, being a 3-time NBA champion. Bird is a player that could play and absolutely dominate in any era. He was one of the greatest scorers in NBA history. He was one of the greatest shooters in NBA history. He had 2 50-40-90 seasons in his career, and one of those were after his back problems were already starting to hold him back, basically. He was a Defensive Player of the Year candidate, finished as high as 3rd overall for that award. He had several All-Defense Team selections. He had one game where he had 9 steals and he didn't even play in the 4th quarter. That was the game against Utah where he nearly had a quadruple-double just playing in 3 quarters. And then, Bird as a small forward was one of the greatest rebounders in NBA history. He was one of the greatest passers in NBA history. There was genuinely no weakness, no flaw in Larry Bird's game. And again, if he didn't have those back problems, we can only imagine how dominant the second half of his career would have looked like. The instant he came to the Boston Celtics, he was the only major acquisition for those teams, and he made them 31 wins better. To me, Larry Bird is as good as it gets. He's the closest you can get to being the GOAT. The only major flaw in his legacy is the fact that he doesn't really have that longevity. But Larry Bird at his peak, is arguably as good as just about anyone. Number 1, I have Michael Jordan. Thanks for watching as always. Make sure to like and subscribe for more basketball content, and shout out to the members as always. And I'll see you guys in the next video.